Chapter 459. It was a military common sense that cavalry was not good at sieging cities. The reason was also very simple. Cavalry who came and went like the wind would not carry siege weapons. What's more, when ants besieged a city, it would cost lives. No rational general would be willing to consume the precious cavalry in the siege. Of course, if they could open the city gate by means of insiders, sneak attacks, cheating and so on, the difficulty of sieging the city would immediately drop several levels for cavalry. Now for the bloody cavalry, such was the situation. They rushed in from the open north gate and galloped through the wide streets. If they could defeat all the resistance of the enemy when they were off guard, the overall situation of White Dew City would be settled. However, if they could not defeat the enemy at once, it would be a little troublesome for the bloody cavalry. After all, the cooperation of cavalry and infantry was the key to occupying the city. Without the support of infantry, cavalry would pay a great price to completely eliminate the enemy in the city. Because this was not a field battle. Once the city gate was broken and they could not finish the battle quickly, then they would fall into the cruel and bloody stage of street fighting. In this respect, infantry had a natural advantage over cavalry. Of course, it did not mean that cavalry could not fight street fighting, but they would lose their biggest advantage. The bloody cavalry seemed to be unwilling to fall into the quagmire of street fighting. As soon as they entered the city, they launched the fiercest offensive. Moreover, their attack target was very clear. It was not the ruling core of the eastern region, White Dew Castle, but the manor of the Hall family. From the beginning of breaking the north gate, the defenders who were caught off guard and lacked combat experience were almost defeated under the sudden fierce attack of the bloody cavalry. Even if the general of the eastern region who was responsible for the defense of North City managed to gather thousands of soldiers, the hurriedly formed infantry formation could not withstand the charge of the bloody cavalry. In the battle, these thousands of eastern region infantry were almost instantly defeated by the bloody cavalry and turned into a one-sided massacre. That section of the street was full of corpses of the soldiers of the eastern region. Layer upon layer, the blood flowed like a river, extending far away. The situation of North City completely collapsed. The bloody cavalry did not have the slightest intention of stopping and immediately began to march to the East City where the Hall family was located. Looking from the sky, one could see a fire dragon starting from the north gate and quickly spreading to the east. Wherever it went, the sound of hoofs was like thunder and the sound of killing was everywhere. But when the vanguard of the bloody cavalry rushed into the East City, they immediately noticed that the situation here was completely different from that in the North City. Rows of Eastern Army soldiers were holding huge shields and spears, forming a hedgehog-like formation on the street. Moreover, archers were constantly shooting arrows from the roofs of the houses on both sides of the street. It was obvious that they had been prepared for this. Moreover, according to the speed at which the bloody cavalry broke through the North City, the military formation in the East City might have been arranged before the bloody cavalry entered the city. How was this possible? Clive brandished his lance and swept away the incoming arrows. Then he immediately summoned a messenger and ordered, "Return to the North City immediately and inform Knight Roger of the situation here. Tell him that the defenders of the East City have been prepared for this. I'm afraid this is a trap." The messenger accepted the order and left. Clive's gaze once again returned to the front. Looking at the eastern region's defenders who were already ready for battle, he didn't have the slightest intention of retreating. Even if there was a trap in front of them, under the military order, he had to lead the army forward. "Warriors of the northern frontier, follow me and kill them all. Charge!" On the tower of the North City, Knight Roger quietly listened to the frontline intelligence brought back by the messenger and remained silent. His gaze was fixed on the East City, where smoke was pervading and the sound of killing was shaking the sky. Even if he didn't see it with his own eyes, Knight Roger could guess the tragic situation in the East City. Obviously, the Eastern region's army took advantage of the geographical advantage and pulled the bloody cavalry into a cruel street battle. Compared with the North City, which was easily defeated, that place seemed to be the real hell. Seeing Knight Roger was silent for a long time, the adjutant couldn't help but remind him, "Sir, The House of St. Prospero has obviously been prepared for this. I'm afraid this is really a trap for the bloody cavalry. Knight Roger sneered and said, that depends on whether the trap of the eastern region has the ability to trap the bloody cavalry. The adjutant hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything to persuade him. Instead, he turned his gaze to the east city. He saw that the fire dragons representing the bloody cavalry were obviously hindered and their speed was greatly reduced. However, compared with the newly formed Sky Horse Legion, the bloody cavalry was much stronger. Even if they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, types of troops, and geographical advantage, they were still pushing towards their goal with difficulty. While the battle was in a state of panic, another messenger hurried over and reported to Knight Roger. Sir, the sentries outside the city have found traces of the enemy. Knight Roger was startled and immediately asked, how many people are there? How far are they from us? It's too dark to accurately detect the enemy's location and specific situation. But judging from the marching traces left by the enemy, this is definitely an army of tens of thousands. Knight Roger's heart trembled and his eyebrows wrinkled tightly. The adjutant couldn't help but say, Sir, the Sky Horse Legion is in the city. It should be the Lord's coalition outside. This is definitely a trap. We've been fooled. It's not too late to withdraw the army now. Otherwise, when the army outside the city besieges the North City, we'll really be trapped in the White Dew City. Knight Roger didn't say anything. He just stared at the direction of the East City. The adjutant tried to persuade again, Sir, I suspect that Marquis Vincent betrayed us. Even if we successfully break through the defense of the East City, we won't be able to take the Hall family away. So, you'd better give the order to withdraw as soon as possible. Knight Roger turned his head and asked seriously, Are you sure that Marquis Vincent betrayed us? Of course, Marquis Vincent must have revealed our plan to the Duke of St. Prospero. Otherwise, with the speed of our attack, how could Duke St. Pros have time to gather the army of feudal lords and have them ambush outside the city to block our path of retreat? Seeing that Knight Roger was still hesitating, the adjutant tried to persuade him again. Actually, this isn't strange. After all, Marquis Vincent is from the east. Even if he agreed to cooperate with us, there's no guarantee that he won't change his mind. Sir Earl, you shouldn't have trusted this person. Are you questioning Sir Earl? Knight Roger coldly interrupted. The adjutant immediately lowered his head and said, I wouldn't dare. Knight Roger looked deeply at the adjutant and said, Go personally to the East City to supervise the battle. Within 3 hours, we must kill our way to the Hall family's manor. After that, Knight Roger turned to the messenger and ordered, Let the sentries find the position of the army outside the city and report back to me at any time. Yes. Chapter 460. The night was dark. The Duke of St. Prospero stood on the balcony of White Dew Castle and looked into the distance. From where he stood, he could vaguely see the situation of the battle in the eastern city. Although the bloody cavalry was very brave, they were still trapped in the layers of defense carefully built by the Sky Horse Legion. Of course, the Duke of St. Prospero was also very clear that the eastern region would have to pay a terrible price if the northern frontier cavalry were to stay in White Dew City. It was even more terrible than the price they had to pay in the Battle of Shadow Canyon. But the Duke of St. Prospero was still determined to carry out the plan, because he understood that the meaning of this battle was not only to annihilate the cavalry of less than 20,000 people, but also to pull out the sharpest tooth of the northern frontier. More importantly, it was more significant for the eastern region. The eastern region army had been weak for many years because it lacked a whetstone. This time, the Duke of St. Prospero wanted to use the bloody cavalry as the toughest whetstone to forge an iron-blooded army for the eastern region. As for the lives and flesh that were about to be consumed in the process of wetting, the Duke of St. Prospero thought that it was the price the eastern region had to pay. This was the cold-bloodedness and decisiveness that a wise lord must have. Light footsteps sounded behind him, and the familiar rose fragrance made the Duke of St. Prospero guess the identity of the person without looking back. Sure enough, the Duchess walked gracefully to her husband's side. She looked at the fire in the city and smiled. It seems that the bloody cavalry won't give up until they achieve their goal. The Duke of St. Prospero smiled proudly and said, "Of course. The Hall family is too important for the northern frontier. So the bloody cavalry can't smoothly take those people from White Dew City, and the northern frontier will never be able to completely control the new Shui River. And we also have a bargaining chip to persuade Earl Hall to change his mind." "Are you really going to forgive the Hall family? Do I have a choice?" The Duke of St. Prospero gnashed his teeth and said, "The Nushui River is too important to the eastern region. That old bastard Earl Hall knew that, so he launched this rebellion without fear." The Duchess sighed and said helplessly, "If that's the case, Vincent's position as the first successor can no longer be shaken." Hearing this, the Duke of St. Prospero suddenly turned his head and stared at the side of his wife's face. He asked, "Why did you encourage me to change the heir?" "Of course it's because of Vincent's crushing defeat in Silvermoon City," the Duchess replied casually. "Are you regretting it?" The Duke of St. Prospero didn't let the question go so easily. He continued to ask, "No, before Vincent messed up the Battle of Silvermoon City, you already expressed your dislike for him. Also, why was the Fiennes family pulled over by Evan? Do you really think I don't know anything?" The Duchess' eyes flashed, as if her thoughts had been pointed out. She raised her head and tucked a few strands of hair that had been messed up by the night wind behind her ears, as if to hide her guilt. She smiled and said, "Yes, I really don't like Vincent very much." But the Duchess turned her head and faced her husband. "Have you forgotten? Vincent was the first child I was pregnant with. Because of his inexperience, he suffered a lot. So, compared to Evan and Anna, I really don't like Vincent enough. Of course, this is my own problem. As a mother, I shouldn't be so biased. Is that so?" The Duke of St. Prospero quietly looked at his wife's face. He didn't know if he believed the somewhat ridiculous explanation she gave. Then he asked, "What about Evan?" "What?" The Duchess was stunned. "A few days ago, didn't you persuade me to let Anna inherit the Duke of the Eastern region?" The Duke of St. Prospero looked at his wife with a scrutinizing gaze. "How did Evan fall out of your favor again? Isn't that because he has disappointed us time and time again? Alfalfa City, the Fire Velvet Army, and even gathering the lords to try to besiege Colin Angeli without permission. That's why I feel that maybe he's not the best candidate to become the Duke of the Eastern region." "Is that so?" "Yes. Moreover, Anna has made great progress on the path of the Knight. She has a high chance of advancing to the Holy Realm. It's indeed a good choice for her to inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern region." "Is that all? What else?" the Duchess said with a matter-of-fact expression. Then she seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, "By the way, speaking of Anna, have you found out where she is?" Seeing that his wife was trying to change the topic again, the Duke of St. Prospero finally lost his patience and said in a deep voice, "Okay, Kate, stop pretending. I've seen through your methods." The Duchess was stunned. Then she looked at her husband with a puzzled expression and asked, "What are you pretending for? What methods?" The Duke of St. Prospero sneered, "Difficulties in giving birth to the first child? Defeat at Silvermoon City? These are all excuses. The real reason you don't want Vincent to inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern region is because he married a woman from the Hall family." Without waiting for the Duchess to explain, the Duke of St. Prospero continued. "It's the same for Evan. Alfalfa City, the Fire Velvet Army. These are all reasonable excuses. In fact, ever since I publicly announced his engagement with Grace of the Bruggen family, you've been trying to persuade me to make Anna the first heir. So, what you care about is not who will be the Duke of the Eastern region, but who the Duke's spouse will be. If I'm not wrong, you should have already found a believer husband for Anna, right? Is that how you see me?" The Duchess' body trembled slightly, as if she couldn't believe that her husband was making such malicious assumptions about her. "Isn't that so?" The Duke of St. Prospero snorted coldly, looking at his aggrieved wife. His heart was as hard as iron. "I really regret listening to your nonsense. If I had always firmly defended Vincent's right to inherit, then none of this would have happened." "Ha!" The Duchess suddenly sneered. "So that's how it is. You want to push all the blame onto me." "Enough." The Duke of St. Prospero growled. unable to restrain his anger as he grabbed his wife's arm. "Kate, you've disappointed me. You've been married to the house of St. Prospero for so many years, and you've even given birth to 3 children for me, but your heart has always been with the church. Of course, this isn't a big deal. After all, the house of St. Prospero is a loyal ally of His Holiness the Pope. But, of all things, you shouldn't have had any ideas about my heir." The Duchess' face gradually paled, not knowing whether it was because the Duke of St. Prospero had hurt her arm or because her thoughts had been pointed out. Just as she was thinking hard about how to explain to her furious husband, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly rang out. The steward saw from afar that the atmosphere on the balcony didn't seem right. It was reasonable to say that he shouldn't disturb them, but the situation was urgent, so he couldn't care less. He braced himself and walked over. The Duke of St. Prospero angrily asked, "What's the matter?" The steward didn't dare to raise his head, and said with a trembling voice, "Master, young Master Vincent. He was assassinated in the Hall family." Chapter 461. What did you say? The Duke of St. Prospero immediately let go of his wife and grabbed the butler's collar with a ferocious look on his face. Under the Duke's ferocious gaze, the old butler had no choice but to explain in a trembling voice. "My lord, according to Master Vincent Squire, when the young master rushed to the Hall family manor, he happened to meet a group of people from the northern frontier who were holding the Hall family members hostage and preparing to escape. The young master was so angry that he ordered the manor to be surrounded and then personally fought with the people from the northern frontier. But in a moment of carelessness, the young master was actually killed by a person from the northern frontier wearing red armor." People from the northern frontier. The Duke of St. Prospero dragged the butler to the edge of the balcony and pointed to the east city. "Look carefully, the bloody cavalry hasn't been able to break through the defense line of the Sky Horse Legion. How could they kill the Hall family and try to hold them hostage and escape?" "My lord, I don't know either. Maybe it's a group of assassins from the northern frontier who secretly sneaked in, not bloody cavalry soldiers. How many of them are there?" "According to the report, there are about a few dozen people." "So few people, are you all stupid pigs?" The Duke of St. Prospero angrily threw the butler to the ground and then rushed out like an angry bull. The Duchess watched her husband's back gradually disappear at the end of the promenade. She then turned to the butler who was still huddled in the corner and asked, "What about Molly and Eckhart? Did they go back to the Hall family?" The Molly mentioned by the Duchess was actually the wife of Marquis Vincent, and Eckhart was the son of Marquis Vincent. "No, my lady, they are still in White Dew Castle." "Well, send someone to keep an eye on them and don't let them leave the castle." After the butler left, the Duchess stood on the balcony and looked in the direction of the Hall family. She touched the bruise on her wrist that was just caused by her husband, and her expression became a little uncertain. The Hall family. The fierce battle had stopped. The number of assassins from the northern frontier who rushed in was not large, and they were quickly killed or subdued by the Sky Horse Legion who came to support. But after achieving such a victory, none of the Eastern Army soldiers present could laugh. Because Marquis Vincent was actually dead. An extremely oppressive atmosphere enveloped the manor, as if it was the prelude to a storm. Muffet's face was so gloomy that it looked like water could drip from it. He suppressed the anger and fear in his heart and asked the woman in front of him, "Lady Phelan, how did these northern frontier people appear in the Hall manor?" Madame Phelan, the wife of Earl Hall and the current person in charge of the Hall family in White Dew City, forced herself to remain calm. "Lord Muffet, how did these people from the northern frontier sneak into White Dew City? Shouldn't they be asking your Sky Horse Legion?" The Knight of Muffet was not willing to take the blame, so he immediately sneered and asked, "Madame Phelan, who do you think you can fool? Your Hall family has been colluding with the northern frontier for a long time. Earl Hall's actions in Alfalfa City are a blatant betrayal of the Eastern Army. And this time, the Blood Cavalry rushed into White Dew City with your family's manor as their target. Isn't it obvious what they want to do? I don't know what the people from the northern frontier want to do, but don't you dare slander the Hall family." "Then why did you bring your luggage?" The Knight of Muffet sneered. "It's so late, are you still planning to go out?" Madame Phelan suddenly choked and was speechless. The Knight of Muffet took the opportunity to threaten, "Madame Phelan, the Duke hasn't put you on trial yet because he wants to give the Hall family a chance to turn over a new leaf. So, don't try to quibble anymore. Tell me, did these people from the northern frontier get in touch with you long ago?" Madame Phelan struggled for a while before she finally gritted her teeth and said, "Lord Muffet, do you know who told us to prepare to escape?" "Marquis Vincent." "Marquis Vincent?" The Knight of Muffet didn't expect to get such an answer from Madame Phelan, but his first reaction was, this woman was lying. So, he snorted and said disdainfully, "Madame Phelan, it's not a smart choice to slander a knight who just died bravely." "But this is the truth," Madame Phelan insisted. "It was Marquis Vincent who asked Molly to inform us. He said that if we see knights in red armor, we should follow them." The Knight of Muffet stared into Madame Phelan's eyes, and she didn't flinch. His intuition told him that Madame Phelan wasn't lying. But if this was the truth, then didn't it mean that Marquis Vincent had long planned to help the Hall family escape? That was too ridiculous. And what was even more ridiculous was that Marquis Vincent died in the battle to prevent the Hall family from escaping. The Knight of Muffet was speechless. How could he almost be deceived by such a contradictory and flawed lie? "Madame Phelan, if you don't tell the truth, then don't blame me for being impolite." Before the Knight of Muffet could begin to take action against the stubborn Madame Phelan, a sudden greeting came from outside the manor, "Your Grace." The Knight of Muffet's heart trembled. He no longer cared about Madame Phelan and immediately strode outside. Before he could reach the entrance of the manor, he saw the Duke of St. Prospero striding in. "Your Grace." The Knight of Muffet immediately bowed, and then heard the low and hoarse voice of the Duke of St. Prospero, "Where is it?" "It's in the hall." The Knight of Muffet hurriedly led the way. He thought that the Duke of St. Prospero would ask about the details, but he only walked forward in silence. He didn't even stop when he passed by Madame Phelan. After entering the hall, the Duke of St. Prospero found that his son's body had already been collected and placed in a crystal coffin. He took a few steps forward and saw Vincent lying there peacefully. If it wasn't for the hideous wound on his chest, he would have thought that he was just sleeping. Seeing the Duke of St. Prospero standing in front of the coffin for a long time without saying anything, the Knight of Muffet hurriedly gave a look to the guards in the hall. He then took the lead and retreated, leaving the Duke of St. Prospero and his son alone. The whistling cold wind kept blowing into the hall, bringing with it the sounds of fighting in the distance. The Duke of St. Prospero stood alone in front of the coffin. He suddenly felt a heart-wrenching sorrow, as well as endless regret and self-blame. You would only know how to cherish something after losing it. Now that he was facing Vincent's body, the Duke of St. Prospero finally realized that Vincent was actually his best successor. Looking at Evan's recent performance, was he really better than Vincent? Not to mention that naive and unreliable Anna. At least when White Dew City was in danger, only his eldest son, Vincent, was still here, helping him formulate strategies to deal with the enemy, and even risking his life to fight. The churning regret and hesitation gnawed at the Duke of St. Prospero's heart like ants. If he hadn't listened to the rumors and insisted on protecting his eldest son's inheritance, outsiders wouldn't have taken the opportunity to stir up chaos in the East, and he wouldn't have lost his beloved son. In his grief, the Duke of St. Prospero couldn't help but tear up. In his blurred vision, the Duke of St. Prospero seemed to have noticed that his son's body moved. He thought that he was hallucinating because of his grief, but in the next second, a sharp pain came from his chest. The Duke of St. Prospero's eyes widened. He saw his son, who was supposed to be dead, staring at him. In his hand was a jet-black dagger. The dagger pierced through the crystal coffin and into the Duke of St. Prospero's chest. Chapter 462. In the cold wind, Lady Phelan tightened her collar, but she still couldn't stop the cold air from drilling into her neck. What made her even colder was the cold gazes of the surrounding Pegasus Legion soldiers. Just now, the Duke of St. Prospero hurriedly walked past her. Although he didn't say anything, his indifferent attitude was enough to make Lady Phelan tremble in fear. If the Hall family still had a chance to turn over a new leaf in the past, now that Marquis Vincent had died here, this chance had become extremely slim. What was worse was that with the death of Marquis Vincent, Even if the Duke of St. Prospero forgave the Hall family, the future of the Hall family in the eastern region was doomed to be bleak. That was because the Hall family's biggest backer was gone. What they were about to face was endless suspicion and suppression. Therefore, in the current situation, the only way out for the Hall family seemed to be to seek refuge in the northern frontier. Even if they had to bear the name of a traitor, it was still better than continuing to stay in the eastern region. But the problem was how to escape to the northern frontier. Lady Phelan knew that the Blood Cavalry had already killed their way into the White Dew City. Now, she only hoped that the legendary invincible Northern Frontier Army could smoothly bring their family out of here. Lady Phelan, in a trance, Lady Phelan seemed to hear someone calling her. But when she looked around, she couldn't find that person. Just when she thought she was hallucinating, that hoarse, monotonous voice sounded again. Lady Phelan heard it clearly this time, and then she was shocked to find that the voice was actually from a Northern Frontier's corpse under her feet. That person was nailed to the ground by a spear, but through the eye holes of the armor, Lady Phelan could see that cold gaze staring at her. Her throat couldn't help but roll, but she resisted the fear and didn't make a sound. Looking around, Lady Phelan took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention and quietly approached the corpse. Later, when the chaos starts, you will lead the Hall clan members and flee in the direction of the southern gate. That person's voice was rough and cold, as if it came from hell, but it gave Lady Phelan a glimmer of hope. She couldn't help but whisper, "What chaos? Is the Blood Cavalry coming?" However, her question was not answered. Madame Phelan could not help but ask again, but there was still no response. It was as if the person could not hold on any longer and died after saying that. Lady Phelan looked around and saw that no one was paying attention to her. She squatted down and moved closer to the corpse, knocking on his helmet. Dong dong, there was no movement. Dong dong, stop knocking. Lady Phelan was startled. She turned around and realized that it was Knight Muffet who spoke behind her. "Lord Muffet." Lady Phelan stood up. She felt a little guilty, but she didn't dare to look into Knight Muffet's eyes. The Knight of Muffet did not hear the previous conversation. He only saw Lady Phelan knocking on the armor of a corpse. "What are you doing?" "I'm just curious about who this person is. How many people from the northern frontier do you know?" The Knight of Muffet said casually, but out of curiosity, he also squatted down and took off the helmet of the corpse. "Why does this person look so familiar?" The Knight of Muffet looked at the middle-aged man's face and rubbed his chin. Immediately, his eyes froze, because he recognized the identity of the corpse. But when the Knight of Muffet was about to call for help, the Duke of St. Prospero's screams suddenly came from the hall. At this moment, the Knight of Muffet was shocked to find that the corpse in front of him suddenly opened his eyes. A terrifying aura instantly shrouded the Knight of Muffet. In a trance, the Knight of Muffet felt like he was looking at a dragon from ancient times. The strong pressure made it impossible for him to breathe, let alone scream. Fortunately, the resurrected person from the northern frontier did not care about the Knight of Muffet at all. He jumped up from the ground, pulled out the long spear that pierced through his body, and then rushed into the hall like an arrow. After the man left, the Knight of Muffet sat down on the ground in relief and gasped for breath. At the same time, he shouted, "Quick! Go save the Duke! The man just now is a level 6 warrior from the northern frontier, Lucian." Lucian? One must know that in this world where there were only a few saints, level 6 represented the peak of a person's strength. Therefore, Lucian's name was widely known even in the eastern region. At this time, when the Knight of Muffet called out the identity of the man, the guards of the House of St. Prospero immediately rushed into the hall like crazy, trying to protect their master. But at this time, the northern frontier assassins who were supposed to be dead suddenly jumped up from the ground one by one. Caught off guard, a large number of the soldiers of the eastern region were injured or killed. Shrill screams filled the entire manor of the Hall family. Seeing this, Lady Phelan finally understood what the chaos that man mentioned before was. Therefore, she made a prompt decision and shouted at the Hall family members who were standing there in a daze. "Quick! Follow me, let's rush out together." After saying that, she took the lead and rushed out. Seeing this, The rest of the Hall family members also came to their senses, and all of them followed like a swarm of bees. Seeing this, the Knight of Muffet was angry and anxious, but he had no time to care about these Hall family members, because the safety of the Duke of St. Prospero was obviously more important. Therefore, he pulled a soldier and ordered, "Immediately go and contact the nearby Pegasus Legion and have them intercept the Hall family members who are escaping. Do not let them escape White Dew City." Then, Knight Muffet unsheathed his sword and bellowed, "Brothers! Kill these northern frontier people! Save the Duke! Kill!" In the hall, the crystal coffin was already broken into pieces. Marquis Vincent's entire chest was caved in by the furious Duke of St. Prospero, and a large amount of blood gushed out from his mouth like spring water. Even so, he was still alive. Furthermore, there was a creepy smile on his face as he stared straight at his father. His eyes were filled with undisguised hatred and pleasure. Unfilial son. The Duke of St. Prospero clenched his fists and was about to smash down again. But at this moment he suddenly felt a strong sense of danger coming from behind. Turning his head, the Duke of St. Prospero saw a figure rushing towards him at an astonishing speed. Lucien? Since the Knight of Muffet had taken off his helmet, the Duke of St. Prospero recognized Lucien at a glance. Although the two were not familiar with each other, the Duke of St. Prospero knew that this was a difficult opponent. He did not dare to be careless and immediately used all his strength. Dazzling holy light constantly surged around the Duke of St. Prospero and rapidly gathered in his hands. In the void, there seemed to be the neighing of a war horse. The Duke of St. Prospero's face was calm as he punched out. Chapter 463. Boom. With a loud noise, an invisible wave of air exploded around the Duke of St. Prospero and Lucien. All the windows in the building shattered at the same time, and the scattered glass shards were like a dense rain of bullets, hitting the soldiers of the eastern region who were trying to surround them. The Duke of St. Prospero stood in the air, and a huge phantom of a white horse appeared behind him. On the back of the white horse, a pair of giant wings more than 10 meters long suddenly spread out, almost occupying the entire space of the hall. Amidst the deafening roar, the pair of giant wings blocked out the light and pressed down on Lucien from all directions. The domineering aura brought about by the wings caused all the objects in the hall to tumble around. As the giant wings flapped, the air was crazily squeezed out like a pump, and the whole hall trembled violently. The magnificent energy of the holy light gradually condensed into a complete entity and crashed down on Lucien. Lucien's face did not change in the slightest, but he quickly burst out all the fighting power in his body and condensed a large red crystal shield in front of him. Compared to the huge wings, the thin shield seemed to be on a completely different level of power. Boom! In an instant, the giant wings, accompanied by a terrible impact, fiercely hit the crystal shield. With a cracking sound, fine cracks visible to the naked eye appeared on the crystal shield and continued to spread in all directions at a worrisome speed. It was only the first round of confrontation, but the winner was immediately decided between the two. Although they were both 6th grade, the Duke of St. Prospero, as a knight, was obviously stronger than Lucien, who was a warrior. This was the suppression of a god's profession over an ordinary one. In fact, under normal circumstances, the Duke of St. Prospero would not be worried at all about fighting with Lucien. He had absolute confidence that he could defeat a 6th grade warrior, but now he was not so confident, because there was a dagger in his chest. Feeling the piercing pain and the constant loss of strength, the Duke of St. Prospero knew that he had to end the battle quickly, or his injuries would only worsen. The Duke of St. Prospero stared at Lucien, who was still struggling in front of him. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and let out a silent roar. In an instant, countless white and gold threads shot out from the Pegasus phantom behind him into the sky. All the threads circled around and suddenly burned fiercely in the air. In the blink of an eye, they became a huge golden torch. With a strange light sound, a white dot suddenly lit up in the torch. A helical horn that was as flawless as jade extended out of the torch and stabbed at the crystal shield in front of Lucien at a seemingly slow but actually extremely fast speed. It was so fast that Lucien had no time to react at all. He could only watch the jade's spiral horn touch the shield as if it was nothing at all. Everything seemed to have stopped in an instant. Perhaps in a second, or perhaps a century, time would begin to flow again. The crystal shield began to slowly turn into ashes. Dust rose into the air. However, the jade-like spiral horn did not disappear. It was still stabbing at Lucien in a slow but firm way. Although the horn had not touched Lucien's body, the armor on his body seemed to be unable to withstand such a terrifying force. Like a candle in magma, it quickly softened, caved in, and even turned into molten iron dripping to the ground. The helical horn finally touched Lucien and went through him effortlessly. In front of such a strange force, it seemed that any defense was useless. Lucien's chest was easily pierced through like a thin piece of paper. Through the big hole, one could even see the broken heart clearly. The Duke of St. Prospero looked at his masterpiece and finally smiled with satisfaction. But then his face turned pale, and his magnificent aura gradually withered. The Pegasus phantom behind him was like snow under the sun, melting in the air bit by bit. Obviously, the terrifying attack just now was a great burden for the Duke of St. Prospero. Cough! The Duke of St. Prospero coughed out a mouthful of blood, but he wiped it off casually. Ignoring Lucien in front of him, he turned around and looked at Vincent, who was hiding in the corner. "You're still alive?" Marquis Vincent gasped in pain. His heart and lungs were almost completely destroyed by the Duke of St. Prospero, but even so, he was still alive. The Duke of St. Prospero slowly walked to his son, his eyes full of undisguised killing intent. He said as he walked, "You unfilial son, do you know? I've already made up my mind to let you inherit my title." "Are you really that impatient?" Marquis Vincent looked at his father, who was approaching him step by step, and smiled. The blood in his mouth made his smile even more ferocious. "Father, your mind is so fickle. How can I wait patiently? Who knows? One day, you'll change your mind." The Duke of St. Prospero's face was as cold as water. He said coldly, "If that's the case, then don't ever wait. Go and repent to the Lord." As he said that, he raised his fist and punched Marquis Vincent's head. However, at this time, the Duke of St. Prospero suddenly felt a strong wave of combat power coming from behind him. He quickly turned around and saw Lucien, who was supposed to be dead, rushing towards him again. The long spear in Lucien's hand was like a dragon coming out of the water. It left a silver shadow in the air and pierced towards the Duke of St. Prospero. Caught off guard, the Duke of St. Prospero could only slightly avoid his vital parts, and the spear pierced through his right chest. The Duke of St. Prospero screamed in pain, but he still reached his hand forward and grabbed Lucien's throat tightly. Along with the sound of bone cracking, Duke St. Pros crushed Lucien's throat bone. However, Lucien did not seem to feel anything. He did not even try to defend himself. Instead, he reached out his hand and grabbed the dagger that was stabbed into the Duke of St. Prospero's chest by Marquis Vincent. Then he twisted it hard. The Duke of St. Prospero let out a desperate roar. His hands tightened again, and he tried his best to strangle Lucien to death. Unfortunately, the strength in his body was quickly draining away like the ebbing tide. His vision was getting blurrier and blurrier, and his consciousness was getting weaker and weaker. Before the darkness completely swallowed him up, the Duke of St. Prospero murmured desperately and confusedly, But, don't you die." Chapter 464. Duke! Muffet, who had finally rushed into the hall, saw the scene in front of him and let out a desperate and mournful cry. But then he took a deep breath and got into a fighting posture. Even though he knew that he was no match for Lucien, he was ready to do his best to fulfill his promise. However, Lucien did not pay any attention to Muffet at all. He picked up the body of the Duke of St. Prospero and rushed out. Muffet was stunned. For a moment, he did not know whether he should be happy or angry. Just when he was about to chase after Lucien, he suddenly heard a slight groaning sound. "Marquis!" Muffet rushed over and looked at Marquis Vincent, who was lying on the ground in surprise and worry. "You're still alive." Marquis Vincent's mouth was full of blood. He struggled and said weakly, Don't let the whole family escape. Muffet thought that Marquis Vincent was awakened by the aftermath of the battle and did not know that the Duke of St. Prospero had been assassinated, so he was still paying attention to the Hall family. Don't worry. The Hall family can't escape. Please hold on. I'll find a priest to treat you. Muffet did not dare to provoke Marquis Vincent with the news of the Duke of St. Prospero's death. After a few words of comfort, he immediately went out to find a priest. At this time, the manner of the Hall family had quieted down. Most of the guards had gone to chase the group of assassins from the northern frontier, or the members of the Hall family who had escaped. Only a few people were left to guard nearby. You go to the church immediately. Just when Muffet was about to tell a guard to go to the church and find a priest, he saw a figure appear at the gate of the manor. Duchess. Muffet hurriedly saluted and then realized that the Duchess was the Archbishop of the Eastern region. With her there was no need to find a priest, so he immediately said, Madam, Marquis Vincent is now seriously injured and his life is in danger. Please go and see him quickly. The Duchess frowned and said in surprise, Vincent is still alive? Muffet suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Maybe there was a mistake. Take me there quickly. The Duchess followed Muffet and asked, Where's the Duke? Why don't I see him? Knight Muffet lowered his head and said in shame and pain, The Duke? I'm afraid he has already been killed. What? The Duchess suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her body swayed and she almost fell over. Knight Muffet hurriedly advised, Madam, please put away your grief for the time being and treat Lord Marquis first. As for your grace, I've already sent men to track down the assassins from the northern frontier. I'll let you know when I have the exact information. Okay. The Duchess nodded her head shakily. She was still in a daze, but she forced herself to walk into the hall and to Marquis Vincent. Madam, you can rest assured and treat Lord Marquis injuries. If you need anything, please feel free to ask. I will be waiting outside. All right. After Knight Muffet left, the Duchess checked on Marquis Vincent's injuries and checked his breathing. Then, she revealed a look of surprise. Obviously, she found it hard to believe that her son was still alive after being injured like this. But in the face of her son's serious injuries, the Duchess just looked at him without any intention of treating him. Time passed little by little. The Duchess seemed to be thinking about something and didn't care that her own son was slowly sliding into the abyss of death beside her. After some time, footsteps sounded again, and the Duchess came out of her thoughts. Vincent. The Marquise ran in with a panicked expression. When she saw the terrible injuries on her husband's body, her originally pale face instantly became even paler. Madam Kate. Vincent, how is he? The Marquis even forgot to salute and asked in a daze. The Duchess didn't mind her daughter-in-law's lack of manners and said with a worried look, I've already treated him, but his injuries are too serious. Whether he can wake up or not depends on his will and whether my lord is willing to take pity on him. The Marquis knelt on the ground and cried and begged, Please save him. The Duchess helped Molly up and said, He is my son. How can I not try my best to save him? You can find someone to carry him back first. Be careful not to touch his wounds and don't find anyone to look at him. I will personally treat him later. The Marquis wiped her tears and nodded repeatedly, Okay. But after saying a few more things to pay attention to, the Duchess went out. But she didn't notice that after she turned around, Marquis Vincent suddenly opened his eyes and stared at his mother coldly. On the tower of the North City, Knight Roger stared in the direction of the East City. No one knew what he was thinking. One by one, messengers came and went, bringing the latest situation of the battlefield here. The situation in the East City was still worrying, but the vanguard of the Blood Cavalry was not far from the Hall family's manor. It was estimated that it wouldn't be long before good news came from there. However, the situation outside the city was not optimistic. According to the latest news sent back by the sentries, the army of the eastern region outside the city had surrounded White Dew City and was constantly shrinking the encirclement. In fact, Knight Roger was not afraid of the enemy's siege tactics. In the face of the powerful attack of the Blood Cavalry, The encirclement of the eastern region was no different from a leaky cloth bag. However, there was a prerequisite, that is, the blood cavalry could set up a formation outside the city and get enough distance to charge and accelerate. If they really let the army of the eastern region outside the city block the city gate, the tragic scene in the Shadow Canyon back then would probably happen again. Therefore, the blood cavalry must not be trapped in the city. They must start to break out of the encirclement before the army outside the city tightened the encirclement. The adjutant couldn't help but go forward several times to persuade Knight Roger, but he still looked in the direction of the East City and never gave the order to break out. Time passed bit by bit, and the army outside the city was also getting closer and closer. Just as Knight Roger was about to give the order to break out of the encirclement, a beam of dazzling blue magic signal tore through the dark sky and bloomed over the East City. Knight Roger was overjoyed and immediately gave the order, "Sound the horn, gather the army and get ready to break out." "Yes." Woo! The low and rhythmic sound of the bugle resounded through the night sky of White Dew City. The blood cavalry who were still fighting in the East City immediately woke up, stopped fighting with the enemy, and began to retreat in an orderly manner. Clive wiped the bloodstains on his face, pulled the messenger who was passing by and hurriedly said, "We haven't received the people of the Hall family yet. I just saw them running south. Why are they retreating now?" "I don't know." "Execute the military order." Clive sighed and had no choice but to turn his horse around and shout, "That's right. Brothers, let's go back with me." Chapter 465. The night was dark. Count Nicole looked in the direction of White Dew City in the distance and asked the adjutant beside him, "How long will it take to reach White Dew City?" "My lord, according to our current speed, it will take about 3 hours." The adjutant thought for a while and asked, "Do we need to speed up?" Count Nicole immediately refused. There are 100,000 Pegasus Legion in White Dew City. They have the geographical advantage and are well prepared. It is impossible for them to be defeated by the blood cavalry in such a short time. We don't need to rush. Just stabilize the formation and push forward slowly. "Yes." While they were talking, there was a sudden disturbance in the left wing of the army. Count Nicole frowned and ordered, "Stop." The adjutant carefully reminded him, "My lord, it seems that a small unit of the blood cavalry is harassing us, intending to slow down our marching speed." "I know." Count Nicole nodded. "Send someone to check the situation just in case." "Yes." The adjutant was a little helpless. He actually wanted to hint Count Nicole not to be slowed down by the blood cavalry, but he did not expect. However, the adjutant could understand Count Nicole's mentality. This time, the Duke of St. Prospero issued a conscription order, asking the lords to lead the army to surround White Dew City and block the retreat of the blood cavalry. Although the lords did as they were told, they all had their own thoughts. For example, Count Nicole actually knew that the blood cavalry kept sending small units to harass them in order to slow down the speed of the allied forces of the lords. But Count Nicole deliberately pretended to be stupid and dawdled outside the city. The reason was very simple. He did not want his army to face the terrible blood cavalry. The news that the Fire Velvet Army was completely wiped out by the 3,000 blood cavalry had spread to the south of the Alsace Mountains. When Count Nicole first received the news, he was absolutely unwilling to believe it. But as the news was confirmed, Count Nicole had the idea that the blood cavalry was invincible. The other lords who accepted the conscription order of the Duke of St. Prospero were the same. The fiasco of the Fire Velvet Army completely destroyed their confidence. If 3,000 bloody cavalry were so terrifying, then what about the main force of the bloody cavalry in the White Dew City? Therefore, the lords of the eastern region hoped that the Sky Horse Legion and even the people of the eastern region in the White Dew City would consume the strength of the blood cavalry. When the blood cavalry lost its spirit, they would lead their own troops to surround them and see if they could get some military exploits. As for whether this would cause heavy damage to Sky Horse Legion, plunge the people of White Dew City into misery and suffering, or even allow blood cavalry to find a chance to escape, Count Nicole and the other lords of the eastern region didn't care. What they cared more about was their own family's army. That was their foundation. The Duke of St. Prospero had already expected this, so he made a promise to the lords who came to support him. For example, the Duke of St. Prospero had promised him that if he could wipe out the main force of the bloody cavalry in this battle, the Nickel family would be promoted one level higher. If he were to go up from Count, he would be Marquis. Generally speaking, the four dukes rarely conferred the title of Marquis, except for the title of their first successor. After all, the territory required to confer a Marquis was too large. The dukes were reluctant to let their vassals control such a huge force. That was to say, Garcia, who came from the house of St. Hilda and had made countless military exploits, could be conferred the title of Marquis. Count Nickel never thought that one day he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Marquis Garcia. But even such a temptation could not offset his fear of the bloody cavalry. In fact, if the Duke of St. Prospero could appoint a person with enough trust and prestige to be the supervisor, these lords would not dawdle like this. But the problem was that the Duke of St. Prospero could not send anyone else. He certainly could not leave the White Dew City. As for his eldest son, Marquis Vincent, he did not fully trust him at that time. His second son, the Earl of Avon, was not around, and even his youngest daughter, Anna, was nowhere to be found. The others were not qualified to control the situation. In desperation, the Duke of St. Prospero could only appoint Count Nickel as the temporary commander-in-chief of this coalition of lords. But judging from the current situation, he seemed to have overestimated Count Nickel's courage. Moreover, he misjudged the real target of the bloody cavalry to attack the White Dew City. It was not the Hall family, but himself. The glimmer of dawn slowly revealed from the east, gently but firmly tearing apart the dark night. Count Nickel woke up from his doze. He rubbed his eyes and patted his back. The old count, who was over 60 years old, suddenly felt that he could no longer adapt to the military life. In fact, if the promise given by the Duke of St. Prospero was not too tempting, Count Nickel was not prepared to lead the army himself. Just as he stretched his body, suddenly, the earth seemed to shake. Countless endless rumbles came from afar, like the explosion of spring thunder, but also like the surging waves. Count Nickel's face changed and he immediately shouted, "All troops stop advancing. Get into formation and prepare to meet the enemy." As soon as the order was passed down, Count Nickel saw countless black shadows suddenly appear on the horizon, filling the whole earth without a trace of a gap. Even the rising sun was covered by this black tide. For a time, the weather changed. Count Nickel only felt that his heart was tightly grasped by a big hand, and he could not breathe at all. Was this the bloody cavalry? Shield up. Spear up. Archers, get ready. Because the marching speed was not fast, and they were already mentally prepared, the response speed of the coalition of lords was very fast. But even if they had a complete defensive formation, they could not help but feel afraid in the face of the surging bloody cavalry at this moment. Nearly 20,000 elite cavalries launched a group charge. Such a scene could never be imagined by those who had not experienced it personally. The impact, the oppression, was enough to make anyone tremble in fear. In the face of a large number of the coalition of lords, the bloody cavalry did not choose to do any probing. Instead, it was a simple group charge. Because Knight Roger had absolute confidence. This night, in fact, the bloody cavalry kept monitoring the coalition of lords outside the city and constantly sent small troops to harass them. So, the probing was already in progress. Moreover, the result of the feedback made Knight Roger somewhat disappointed. That's it? Even if he had expected the weakness of the Eastern Army, he did not expect it to be so weak. Moreover, Knight Roger could see at a glance that these lords did not have the courage to fight to the death with the bloody cavalry. Therefore, in the face of such an enemy, Knight Roger decisively chose the most direct and violent way of attack. Go forward. The surging cavalry was like a sharp arrow leaving the bowstring. With an unstoppable momentum, they rushed into the army of the Eastern Territories' allied forces. Like a red-hot knife inserted into butter, the seemingly neat infantry formation was, in fact, vulnerable. In an instant, a ferocious gap was torn open. Countless stunned Eastern soldiers cried and crawled, trying to escape from the devil army in front of them, which seemed to have climbed up from hell. They were not at the same level at all. They could not fight at all. The gap was getting bigger and bigger, deeper and deeper, and soon it became a passage through the whole army. After breaking through the coalition army, the bloody cavalry did not mean to stay and went straight to the north. All that was left was a mess of the Eastern Allied forces and a group of Eastern lords who were completely scared out of their wits. Chapter 466. The first rays of the morning sun slowly penetrated the clouds and reflected the golden light on the land. Unknown weeds stretched their bodies under the morning sun, greedily absorbing the blood on the battlefield that had not yet solidified. A group of vultures hovered in the air. They were never absent death revelers. They flew down from time to grab a piece of rotten meat, but were immediately driven away by the soldiers of the eastern region who were cleaning the battlefield. Count Nichols sat on his warhorse in a daze. The strong smell of blood that wafted over from time to time made him feel nauseous. The piles of corpses on the battlefield almost made the old Count faint. Count Nicole was not injured in this battle, except that he was frightened and ran around, causing his helmet to fall off. However, even though he was completely unharmed, the old Count seemed to have lost his backbone. His stooped back and grizzled hair made him look as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. This encounter came suddenly, and it ended very quickly as well. The bloody cavalry gave a fatal blow to the Eastern Region Lord's coalition army and then left. In fact, the coalition army had been completely stunned at that time. If the bloody cavalry had turned around and charged back and forth a few more times, this huge and bloated coalition army would have immediately fallen apart. If the bloody cavalry had taken advantage of the victory to attack again, few people here would have been able to escape. Although the White Dew City was right in front of them, if the coalition army collapsed, even if the defeated soldiers fled to the White Dew City, the people in the city would not dare to open the gate to receive them. Fortunately, the bloody cavalry did not mean to kill them all. Count Nicole did not think that the other side was being merciful, or that it was beyond their power, but more like it was unnecessary. It was as if a giant had slapped a few flies to death, and the rest of the flies flew around in fear. But the giant would not chase after the flies to kill them one by one. Of course, if the flies came to seek death again, the giant would certainly not spare them. Understanding this, a strong sense of shame and humiliation surged in his heart, and Count Nicole's old face turned red. Everyone knew that the Eastern Region army was very weak, but no one thought that the gap between them and the northern frontier was so big. Once upon a time, Count Nicole had been extremely fortunate to have the Raging Water River as a natural barrier in the Eastern region. But now, he suddenly felt that the Raging Water River was not a barrier to the Eastern region, but more like a cage. It locked the Easterners in this greenhouse, but when the Rayal storm came, the flowers in the greenhouse would only be ruthlessly destroyed. As for the northern frontier, although the threat of the trolls was a great hindrance to the northern frontier, it also helped the northern frontier to forge a terrifying and invincible cavalry. Just over 20,000 bloody cavalry soldiers could turn the eastern region upside down. Count Nicole suddenly felt confused. Where was the future of the eastern region? Your lordship. While he was deep in thought, the adjutant walked over with Count Nicole's lost helmet in his hand. Count Nicole sighed and took his helmet, but did not put it on. He asked in a low voice, "How are the casualties?" The statistics haven't been completed yet, but according to preliminary estimates, I'm afraid that nearly 30,000 people have died in the attack of the bloody cavalry. The corners of Count Nicole's mouth twitched, and his heart was bleeding. He also knew that in fact, the casualties caused by only one wave of the bloody cavalry's attack could not be so great. More people were probably trampled to death when they were running for their lives, and many people should have become deserters out of fear, so they were recorded in the death toll. Seeing that Count Nicole was silent for a long time, the adjutant reminded him in a low voice, "Your lordship, we'd better enter the city as soon as possible, in case the bloody cavalry comes back." Count Nicole woke up from his dream and said, "Yes, yes, yes. Gather the army immediately and march to White Dew City." Under this order, the Allied lords responded extremely quickly. Even if the battlefield had not been cleaned up, they had no time to care about it. Everyone wanted to enter the city immediately and never meet the bloody cavalry in the wild battlefield in their lives. Your lordship, this way please. Count Nickel followed the butler to the inner court of White Dew Castle. He lowered his head and thought about how to explain to the Duke of St. Prospero when he met him later. While he was deep in thought, Count Nickel did not notice the oppressive atmosphere in the castle. In front of the Duke's study, Count Nickel adjusted his collar and gently knocked on the wooden door. Come in. Hearing the voice of the Duchess, Count Nickel did not care. He immediately pushed the door open and entered. There were two people in the study. Except for the Duchess, the other person was not the Duke of St. Prospero as Count Nickel thought, but St. Prospero Ivan. Count Nickel was a little confused, but he still saluted and greeted him. Even though Ivan did not have a noble title and was only a knight from a side branch of the St. Pros family, Count Nickel still treated him with respect. Because Ivan's brother, Immason St. Prospero, was the consul of the Eastern region in the Senate. Therefore, although Knight Ivan's strength was mediocre and his prestige was ordinary, he was still a very important figure in the St. Pros family. The Duchess motioned for Count Nickel to take a seat, and then asked, Count Nickel, what's the situation outside the city? Count Nickel looked embarrassed, but he had no choice but to give a brief account of the situation outside the city. Of course, in the process, he inevitably avoided the important points and found some excuses for himself. But no matter how he glossed over it, he could not change the established fact that the bloody cavalry broke through the military formation of the allied lords and successfully broke through the siege. The Duchess quietly listened to Count Nickel's account, but she did not blame him. Instead, she helped to explain. Count Nickel, it's not your fault. No one thought that the bloody cavalry would choose to withdraw so decisively. Under the circumstances, no one could stop the bloody cavalry who wanted to break through the siege. Thank you for your understanding. Count Nickel breathed a sigh of relief, but then he asked, Duke, where are you now? This time, no matter what reason I have lost the battle, so I want to ask for your forgiveness face to face. As soon as he said this, the room suddenly became quiet. The Duchess's face was full of deep sorrow. Knight Ivan also lowered his head, as if he was silently mourning. Count Nickel blinked his eyes in confusion, thinking that he had said something wrong. But then he heard a shocking piece of news from the Duchess. Count Nickel, the Duke of St. Prospero, was assassinated in Hall Manor. I'm afraid he's dead. What? Count Nickel opened his mouth wide and did not recover for a long time. But then he immediately asked, From what you mean, it's still not certain whether the Duke has been killed? According to Knight Muffet, who was present at the time, the Duke was pierced through the right chest by a spear, and then stabbed in the heart by a dagger. But because the Duke was taken away by the northern frontier, it's not certain whether he's dead or alive. The Duchess covered her mouth, as if she could not control her pain. Count Nickel's mind was in a mess, as if the sky had collapsed. At this time, Knight Ivan said, Duchess, Count Nickel, now is not the time to grieve. Although the bloody cavalry has retreated for the time being, who knows if they will come back? The most urgent thing is to choose a successor to the Duke, let him preside over the overall situation, and stabilize the people. You're right. The Duchess took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Then she turned to look at Count Nickel and asked, Count Nickel, who do you think is more suitable to inherit the position of Duke of the Eastern region? Chapter 467. Hearing the Duchess's question, Count Nickel subconsciously became alert. As an old man who had been in politics for many years, Count Nickel certainly knew that the struggle for succession was often the most tragic and bloody. Especially in the Eastern region, in the House of St. Prospero. The struggle for succession had been going on for a long time. It could even be said that the current terrible situation in the Eastern region was largely caused by the struggle for succession. To be honest, Count Nickel had never wanted to get involved in this mess. He was old, and his style had gradually become more conservative. He was no longer willing to do things that were highly profitable but riskier. Furthermore, the lessons learned from the Hall family and the Bruggins family had strengthened Count Nickel's resolve to stay out of this matter. Duchess, regarding the succession of the Duke of the Eastern region, I really have no right to comment. But the Duchess obviously did not intend to let Count Nickel get away with it so easily. She looked up at him and said in a low voice, "Count Nickel, the eastern region is now in danger. As one of the few remaining loyal vassals of the House of St. Prospero, do you intend to stay out of it?" These words made Count Nickel fall into deep thought. He heard the threat in the Duchess's words, but he also heard the intention to rope him in. At this moment he suddenly realized that of the 3 earls of the eastern region, Count Bruggen had died in battle, and Count Hall could not be trusted. Then, it seemed that Count Nickel was really the only one left in the House of St. Prospero that could be relied on. Count Nickel's cloudy eyes swept over the Duchess and Knight Ivan in front of him. He seemed to understand something, and he could not help but have a certain idea in his mind. But out of his cautious nature, Count Nickel still asked tentatively, "Duchess, what do you think about the succession?" He thought that the Duchess would avoid this question. Even if she had a plan, she would only give a hint. But unexpectedly, she said bluntly, "My husband conferred Vincent as the Marquis of the Eastern region when he was alive. Presumably, in his mind, this is the first successor. So, I am willing to respect his will." Count Nickel looked at the Duchess in surprise. Obviously, he did not expect her to give such an answer. Of course, Count Nickel knew about the succession of the Eastern region, and he also knew that it was the Duchess who had first suggested that the Duke of St. Prospero make his second son, Evan, the first successor. Why did she change her mind now? Count Nickel suddenly realized something and asked, "Bloody cavalry attacked White Dew City this time. Did they take away the members of the Hall family in the city?" Knight Ivan shook his head. Under the desperate resistance of Marquis Vincent and Duke St. Pros, the bloody cavalry returned empty-handed. "That's good." Count Nickel breathed a sigh of relief. He finally understood why the Duchess had changed her mind. As long as the Hall family was still in White Dew City, letting Marquis Vincent inherit the position of Duke of the Eastern region was indeed the wisest choice. With his relationship with the Hall family, it wasn't difficult to change Earl Hall's mind. As long as the new Chouet River was still in the hands of the House of St. Prospero, the Eastern region could be relieved. Although the Earl of Avon was engaged to the daughter of the Bruggen family, the Fire Velvet Army had been wiped out. The Bruggen family's opinion naturally did not matter. As for the Nickel family, they had benefited from Count Nickel's caution and had never really taken sides between the 2 successors. Therefore, no matter who became the Duke of the Eastern region, the Nickel family would not be adversely affected. But just as Count Nickel was about to nod in agreement, Knight Ivan suddenly reminded him, "Duchess, of course I will not question the succession of Marquis Vincent, but, in his current condition, can he really succeed the title of Duke?" Count Nickel was shocked and quickly asked, "What happened to the Marquis?" Knight Ivan sighed and said, "In order to prevent the northern frontier from taking away the Hall family, Marquis Vincent fought bravely. Unfortunately, he was seriously injured and his life is in danger." It was only then that Count Nickel realized that what Knight Ivan had said about fighting to the death was not just an exaggeration. The Duke of St. Prospero died in battle, and Marquis Vincent was seriously injured and on the verge of death. For the sake of the Hall family, the House of St. Prospero, the price was too high. Previously, when the Duke of St. Prospero issued the conscription order, he had told Count Nickel that he was prepared to use the Hall family as bait to lure the bloody cavalry into the city. Then, he would cooperate from the inside and the outside to kill them in White Dew City. But now it seemed that the Hall family was more like a bait thrown by the northern frontier. The targets were the Duke of St. Prospero and Mark Vincent. The people of the northern frontier could not be so cunning, right? Count Nickel tried hard to shake this thought out of his mind, but he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He suddenly felt a sense of fear towards the guardian of the northern frontier, Count Angeli, whom he had never met before. "Duchess, since you propose to let Marquis Vincent inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern region, you must have the confidence to save his life, right?" Faced with Count Nickel's question, the Duchess did not give an answer. She only lowered her head and her shoulders shook slightly, as if she was sobbing. Count Nickel was silent, but he was more puzzled. Since the Duchess, who was the Archbishop of the Eastern region, did not have the confidence to save Marquis Vincent, then why did she propose to let a dying person inherit the position of the Duke? Even if the Earl of Avon's actions in Alfalfa City and Tinder City were disappointing, there was still Miss Anna. Could it be that in order to win over Count Hall, the House of St. Prospero was willing to do anything? After a long time, the Duchess finally put away her grief and said in a deep voice, "Letting Vincent inherit the position of the Duke is my husband's last wish, and also the most legal choice. As for your worries, even if the worst happens, there is still Eckhart." Eckhart? Count Nickel muttered the name and finally understood the Duchess's plan. The person she really wanted to be the Duke's successor was not Marquis Vincent on the surface, but the Marquis' son, Eckhart. Logically speaking, Eckhart's line of succession was after the Earl of Avon and Miss Anna. But if Marquis Vincent inherited the position of the Duke first, then his only son, Eckhart, would automatically be the first in line to be the next Duke of the Eastern region. But Eckhart was only 3 years old. Count Nickel was well aware of the Duchess's intention of pushing a 3-year-old child to the position of the Duke. "I agree." Knight Ivan seemed to have understood something and immediately echoed. Then, the two of them turned their gazes to Count Nickel. Count Nickel knew that he had no choice. The Duchess represented the will of the Church, and Knight Ivan could influence the Senate. As for the lords of the Eastern region, the Hall family would definitely not oppose letting Eckhart inherit the position of the Duke. The Bruggen family no longer had much say after losing the Tinder army. So, as long as the Nickel family agreed, the remaining lords would naturally not dare to have any other thoughts. In this way, the situation in the Eastern region could be stabilized again. But from then on, would the House of St. Prospero be in control of the Eastern region? Or, Count Nickel, what do you think? Hearing the Duchess urging, Count Nickel could only sigh inwardly and say, "I also agree." Chapter 468. As the night fell, smoke gradually rose from the camp in the wild. It was already winter, but the towering Alxis Mountains blocked the cold current from the north, so there would be no extreme cold in the southern part of the eastern region in winter. Especially for the blood cavalry who came from the northern frontier and had been galloping on the sky ice field all year round, this cold was nothing. They didn't raise the bonfire for warmth, but to cook food and drive away mosquitoes and wild beasts. "Teacher, the main force of the blood cavalry should have arrived at White Dew City by now, right?" Next to the bonfire, Prince Harrison fiddled with the dry wood as he asked Colin, who was beside him. Colin had just finished gnawing a deer leg. He threw the deer leg bone into the bonfire and nodded. "Yes." "Teacher, do you think they can successfully break into White Dew City?" "They should be able to." Prince Harrison blinked, as if he thought Colin was a little too confident. After all, although the blood cavalry was almost invincible in the field, they couldn't escape the limitation of cavalry. Facing a strong city like White Dew City, they might not be able to smoothly take it. However, because he had seen Colin create miracles time and time again, Prince Harrison could only suppress this doubt in his heart. At this time, Princess Judy interrupted, "Teacher, if they really break into White Dew City, what are you going to do?" Colin smiled and said, "What do you think I should do?" The little girl tilted her head and said, "I think you can ask the House of St. Prospero to pay a large sum of war reparations." Colin shook his head. "If it's just reparations, isn't it too good for the House of St. Prospero? Then you can ask the Eastern region to send a large number of slaves to the northern frontier to work for you." Seeing that Colin was still smiling without saying anything, Prince Harrison also suggested, "You can also ask the Eastern region to cede some territory." Hearing this, Colin touched his chin and showed an interested look, but still said, "It's still too good for the House of St. Prospero." Princess Judy pouted, "You can't really occupy the Eastern region, right? You are not a descendant of the Paladin family, so you can't be the lord of the Eastern region." "Who made this rule?" Colin suddenly asked curiously. "The first-generation Holy Knights." Princess Judy immediately said. Prince Harrison nodded and added, "When the Empire of Light was established, the first generation of Holy Knights had signed a Holy Covenant. It clearly stated that only the descendants of the Holy Knight family could be conferred the title of Duke." Colin searched through the memories of his predecessor and found that this ignorant and incompetent fellow had never read the Sacred Covenant. He decided to look for it himself when he had the time. After thinking about it for a moment, Colin asked again, "If Vera gives birth to my son, will he become the Duke of the Eastern region?" The two little ones said in unison. Colin asked curiously, "Aren't Vera and my children considered as descendants of the Paladin family?" "Not really." Colin's interest was piqued. However, before he could ask, Prince Harrison explained, "That's not the case. Teacher, the descendants of the Paladin family are different from the descendants of ordinary nobles. The father must be a member of the Paladin family to be considered as a descendant of the Paladin family. For example, your sister Caitlin, if she gives birth to a child for Earl Amon, the child will of course be considered as a descendant of the Amon family, but at the same time, he can also be considered as a descendant of the Angeli family. If the Angeli family has no descendants, he can also inherit the title of the Angeli family. However, the Paladin family is different. Unless the child's father is from the Paladin family, otherwise, he will not be considered as a descendant of the Paladin family." Colin's eyebrows furrowed as he realized something. "So, Vera and my child can only have Angeli as their surname?" Prince Harrison nodded and added, "However, you can choose a child from the descendants of the House of St. Hilda to be your adopted son and let him inherit cousin Vera's title." "Is this also the content of the Holy Alliance?" Colin asked. "This is a tacit unspoken rule of the Paladin family. When you and cousin Vera have children, the House of St. Hilda will naturally remind you." Colin rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought again. He suddenly felt that this tacit unspoken rule of the Paladin family might be the real secret of the Paladin family. According to this rule, the inheritance of the Paladin family was actually a paternal inheritance. It had nothing to do with the mother. Therefore, for so many years, the number of Paladin family in the Empire of Light had only decreased and never increased. Those ordinary nobles who wanted to improve their family's bloodline by marrying the daughters of the Paladin family, such as the golden-tailed butterfly, Morrison family in the northern frontier, were probably just drawing water with a bamboo basket. This also explained why Emperor Reinhardt, who had a bunch of illegitimate children, had to keep his pregnant lovers in captivity until they gave birth to children. It seemed that this was to prevent the bloodline of the San Lorenzo family from being leaked out through these illegitimate children. However, if the Paladin family was really a paternal inheritance, then one thing did not make sense: the existence of female paladins. From the perspective of genetics, the genetic difference between men and women only existed on the sex chromosome. Women were XX and men were XY. According to the previous inference, the genes of the Paladin family must be on the Y chromosome, which was unique to men. In this way, the female descendants of the Paladin family who lacked the Y chromosome would not be able to inherit the Paladin family's bloodline, but they should also not be able to step into the holy domain. However, the fact was that although female paladins were extremely rare, they still existed. For example, one of the only two paladins in the Empire of Light, the Lord of the Western region, the Duke of St. Geryon, was a female paladin. After struggling for a long time, Colin suddenly laughed to himself. This was an unscientific supernatural world, and he was still trying to explain everything with science. It was a bit ridiculous. However, Colin did not think that the genetics he had mastered in his previous life was worthless. After all, the humans in this world were not much different from the humans in his previous life. Even if there was a problem with the inference just now, it should only be a deviation in a small aspect. As long as he could find the source of this deviation, he might be able to crack the secret of the Paladin family's bloodline inheritance. Just as Colin was letting his imagination run wild, a servant came over and reported, "My lord, a messenger claiming to be from Skylark City requests an audience." Skylark City? Colin recalled the map of the eastern region that he had studied before. "Is that the territory of the Fines?" "Yes, my lord." The sentry nodded. "Do you want to see this messenger? Bring him here." After a while, a middle-aged knight in armor came over. "Honorable guardian of the northern frontier, Count Angeli, my name is Robert Fines. On behalf of the Fines, I sincerely invite you to Skylark City as a guest." Colin looked at the knight in front of him with a playful expression and said, Knight Robert, you should know that the Fiennes Viscounts are currently being imprisoned in Silver Moon City by Queen Aisha, right? Therefore, the Fiennes invited you to Skylark City this time to discuss the conditions of ransoming the Fiennes Viscounts with you. Colin thought for a while and said, "How about this? I will wait 3 kilometers outside of Skylark City. Go back and ask your family's manager to come out and meet me. My lord, the Fiennes would like to host you and treat you well. At the same time, we would like to clear up some misunderstandings between us. Don't say any more. I will not enter the city." "My lord, are you worried that—" "Yes, I am worried that you will assassinate me," Colin said with a straight face. Knight Robert was speechless. Chapter 469. Knight Robert was embarrassed. He was used to the way nobles communicated with each other politely even if they wanted to strangle each other to death. Therefore, he did not know how to respond to Colin's straightforwardness. Colin obviously did not care about the feelings of a knight from the east. He immediately waved his hand and said, "Well, you can bring my request back to Skylark City. If the Fiennes feel that it is not suitable, then there is no need to see them." "All right, Count Angeli. I'll pass on your message." Knight Robert bowed and left the room. After he left, Colin called the messenger and said, "Tomorrow, stop outside Skylark City." "Master, are we really not going to Skylark City?" Princess Judy suddenly asked. "You want to go to Skylark City?" "Yes." Princess Judy opened her eyes wide and nodded. "I heard from my mother that it is a city full of singing skylarks. It is so fun." Colin smiled and shook his head. "But even if you go to the city now, you will not see any singing skylarks. Because skylarks sing to seek a mate. It is winter now, not breeding season." "I see." The light in Princess Judy's eyes instantly dimmed, and she lowered her head in disappointment. Colin touched the girl's hair to comfort her. At the same time, he suddenly thought that skylarks seemed to be a migratory bird. Then when winter came, where would they migrate to? Would it be further east, the Shining Moon Forest? Although they had already left the Alsace Mountains, they still had to pass through a hilly area. The warhorses could not gallop, so the speed of the march was naturally not fast. Colin asked the guide and learned that they should be able to reach Skylark City before dark. This kind of long-distance march was very boring, and because it was winter, everything was bleak and the beasts were extinct. There was not even a scenery to see. Princess Judy was bored and began to pester Colin to tell her stories. Colin had no choice but to think of a story to use to entertain the little girl. However, Colin did not care about whether it was not suitable for children and began to choose a historical story. "Today, I will tell you the story of Jing Ku assassinating the king of Qin." "Jing Ku? Qin Wang? What a strange name. Do you want to hear it?" "Yes, I'm listening. Speaking of which, in the Far East, Buzz," Colin suddenly paused. He raised his head and saw a huge arrow drawing a ferocious arc in the air, heading straight for him. "Assassin! Protect the Count! Get out of the way!" Colin reached out with his left and right hands, grabbing Prince Harrison and Princess Judy in each hand. Then he quickly jumped off the warhorse. Boom! A wave of hot air surged over, and Colin hurriedly protected the 2 little guys in his arms. At the same time, he was bewildered. How could it explode? When he turned around, he saw a patch of green flames burning crazily at his original position. In an instant, his warhorse was completely devoured. Wildfire! Colin immediately recognized the item that had left a deep impression on him. "Count, are you all right?" A group of guards swarmed over and immediately used their own bodies to surround Colin, forming 3 layers on the inside and 3 layers on the outside. Colin couldn't hide his anger and immediately ordered, "The enemy is nearby, find them." While speaking, a series of buzzing sounds came from the air again. Colin raised his head and saw several huge arrows shooting straight at him. This time, he saw clearly that those arrows were obviously shot by the ballista used to defend the city, and there were several clay pots hanging on the tails of the arrows. Without thinking, he knew that there must be wildfire in them. "They are there." Colin pointed at a hill not far away, while pulling out his sword and throwing it at the nearest arrow. Boom! The arrow was smashed in the air, and the wildfire exploded like fireworks in front of Colin. At this moment, the bloody cavalry immediately took action. The fastest armored man had already stuck to the cliff like a spider and was quickly climbing up. The rest were divided into 3 groups. One group stayed to protect Colin, Prince Harrison, and Princess Judy. Another group surrounded the hill where the assassins were, and the last group of professionals rushed up the hill. "Sir Robert, let's retreat." "Retreat my ass!" Knight Robert shouted while fiddling with the ballistae. "It's the bloody cavalry down there. We can't escape. The only thing we can do now is to kill Colin Angeli before we die." As soon as Knight Robert finished his words, he heard a scream. When he turned around, he saw one of the soldiers beside him clutching his neck. Knight Robert was about to ask, but he saw the soldier's head slide down. This horrifying scene sent chills down everyone's spines. Before they could recover from their shock, they saw an armored man climb out of the cliff in a strange posture. After landing on the ground, the armored man rushed forward without hesitation. And right after him, more people from the northern frontier climbed out of the cliff. Knight Robert saw this and roared. He pulled out his long sword and rushed forward. Clang, clang. With only 2 strikes, Knight Robert's hand was cut off by the armored man. The gap was too big. Knight Robert endured the severe pain and rolled back awkwardly to avoid the attack of the armored man. The armored man didn't seem to care about Knight Robert. Instead, he rushed straight to the 5 ballistae on the hill. Crack, crack, crack. The 5 ballistae were all destroyed in a burst of wood chips. At this moment, the people from the eastern frontier knew that they had lost, so they hurriedly ran down the hill. However, the bloody cavalry soldiers at the foot of the hill had also rushed up. Unable to advance or retreat, the people from the eastern frontier had to launch a desperate attack on the armored men under the leadership of Knight Robert. But how could they be a match for these blood thralls? They were quickly cleaned up as if they were vegetables. Only Knight Robert was still alive, and he was kept alive for interrogation. "Knight Robert, is this the hospitality that the Fines prepared for me?" "Bah!" Knight Robert was covered in blood, but he still spat at Colin with a ferocious expression. "Colin Angelo, you slaughtered my soldiers from the eastern frontier and imprisoned the Viscounts of Fines. I only hate myself for being incompetent and not being able to kill you. However, this has nothing to do with the Fines. It was just my idea. Nothing to do with it." Colin sneered and pointed at the remains of the ballistae that were moved down from the mountain. "Don't tell me that you stole these ballistae too?" "That's right. Do you take me for a fool?" Colin completely lost interest in him. He waved his hand at the attendant and said, "Kill them. Collect their heads later and pile them up outside Skylark City." Chapter 470. The setting sun was slowly approaching the horizon, but its afterglow was still lingering on this piece of land. Skylark City, whose city gates were tightly shut, looked particularly desolate under the dim light of the sunset. Especially the hundreds of bloody heads piled up outside the North City Gate, which made the whistling north wind seem to have become the sorrowful cries of vengeful spirits. Colin rode on horseback and looked at Skylark City not far away. His eyes flashed with a dangerous light. The hospitality of the Fines family not long ago made him feel lingering fear and anger. However, he still had his rationality and would not order an attack on the city in a fit of anger. It was not a wise choice for cavalry to attack the city. What's more, he only had 3,000 cavalry in his hands. Previously, Colin had attacked Linchue City and Tinder City by deceiving them to open the city gates or by launching sneak attacks to catch the other party off guard. He did not really attack them. He would not be stupid enough to let the precious blood cavalry attack a strong city. Although he would not attack the city, Colin had already remembered this debt in his heart. In the future, he would naturally settle it with the Fines family. Just as Colin was about to lead his army to withdraw and stop entangling with the Fines family, the city gates of Skylark City opened. Colin immediately narrowed his eyes and stared carefully in the direction of the city gates. He was surprised and doubtful. The Fines family was not stupid enough to want to go out of the city to fight, right? If that was the case, then Colin was willing to let these stupid and ignorant people of the eastern region understand what a real invincible army was. The soldiers of the bloody cavalry around Colin also took action. They set up a battle array to prevent the eastern region people from rushing out from the other side. Of course, they were not too nervous. After all, as cavalry who came and went like the wind, if they really wanted to leave, the people of the eastern region would not be able to stop them. Under their gazes, a man and a horse slowly walked out of the open city gates. It did not seem like they were preparing to fight. When the person slowly approached, Colin was surprised to find that it was a woman on the horse. If she was 10 or 20 years younger, she would definitely be a woman of unparalleled beauty. But now, the ruthless years had left traces of vicissitudes on her face. Moreover, she didn't seem to care about her appearance. She didn't put on any makeup, and her wheat-colored skin showed that she wasn't a noble lady who lived in a boudoir. Judging from her steady riding posture, her awe-inspiring gaze, and the imposing aura emanating from her every movement, one could tell that she was a female knight who had been on the battlefield. But at this moment, she was not wearing any armor, nor was she holding any weapon in her hand. She was only holding the head. As if she had just been beheaded, blood was still dripping from her head, forming a bloody trail behind the woman. "Let her come." Colin ordered the guards who tried to stop them. The guards had no choice but to make way for him. The woman approached slowly and did not show any fear in the face of the bloody cavalry soldiers who were staring at her covetously. Colin looked at the valiant female knight and said with a smile, "What? Are there no more men in the Fiennes family?" The female knight came in front of Colin and bowed in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Then she pointed at the pile of skulls not far away and replied with a smile, "That's right. Aren't all the real men of the Fiennes family there?" Colin smiled slightly and felt that this woman was a bit interesting, so he asked again, "Since you dare to come to me alone, why don't you introduce yourself?" "My name is Beatrice. I'm the mother of the Fiennes Viscounts." "Lady Beatrice, I prefer to be called Knight Beatrice." Colin smiled and felt that this woman was more and more interesting. He pointed at the head in her hand and asked, "Well, Knight Beatrice, what do you mean by holding this head?" Beatrice raised the bloody head in her hand and showed it to Colin. At the same time, she said, "Dear guardian of the northern frontier, Your Excellency Count Angeli, on behalf of the Fiennes family, I would like to express my great regret and apology for the assassination you suffered before. The owner of this head is the mastermind behind this assassination. I hope it can calm your anger." Colin looked carefully at the head in the woman's hand. It was also a woman, younger and more beautiful. "Who is she?" Colin asked with interest. "She is the wife of the Fiennes Viscounts." He, why did she send someone to assassinate me? To avenge her husband?" Colin smiled coldly. The woman shook her head. "She is just a lunatic who wants to get rid of you at all costs." "Lunatic?" Colin was instantly amused. "Your Fiennes family is going to throw the crime of assassinating me on a lunatic?" The woman's expression did not change, and she said, "Count, do you know what her other identity is other than being the wife of the Viscounts?" "What?" "She is also the Bishop of Skylark City." Colin raised his eyebrows and finally understood what the other party meant. "Killing a bishop, Knight Beatrice, aren't you afraid of incurring the wrath of the church?" Beatrice's expression was calm, and she said lightly, "When this woman deliberately provoked the warriors of the Fiennes family to die for some unspeakable purpose, she was no longer worthy of the glory of my lord. If His Holiness the Pope wants to punish such a person, I will take responsibility." The admiration in Colin's eyes grew stronger. To be honest, ever since crossing the raging water river and entering the eastern region, Colin was actually quite disappointed. He felt that in the vast eastern region, there were not many heroes who could make him look at them in a different light. This kind of hero did not need to be strong, but a kind of aura, a kind of belief, and a kind of perseverance. The Duke of St. Prospero was strong enough, but this kind of person who was hesitant and overcautious when choosing an heir could not gain Colin's respect. As for Mark Vincent, Earl of Avon, Earl Brugan, Earl Hall, and so on, in Colin's view, they were all useless and could not withstand a single blow. However, when he saw Knight Beatrice outside Skylark City, who dared to open the city gate alone, holding the head of her daughter-in-law in her hand, and walked into the blood cavalry formation as if no one was around, he suddenly felt the long-lost heroic spirit. Even if the strength of this woman was estimated to be around the 3rd or 4th grade. So, Knight Beatrice, you came to see me this time to give me this head? Of course not. Beatrice shook her head and threw the head in her hand to the guard beside Colin, then smiled and invited, "Distinguished guest from the northern frontier, do you dare to come to Skylark City and feel the true sincerity and enthusiasm of the Fiennes family?" The blood on the woman's hand had not dried up, and the smile on her face had a hint of provocation, but this obviously could not scare Colin. But Colin gently squeezed the horse's belly and slowly stepped forward. At the same time, he ordered the soldiers around him, "Wait for me outside the city." "My lord." The blood cavalry soldiers' faces changed, and they all wanted to dissuade him, but Colin immediately raised his hand, indicating that he had made up his mind. Beatrice's face showed a look of appreciation, but she still suggested, "My lord, don't you need to bring a few guards?" Colin laughed and said, "If you dare to go out of the city alone, I naturally dare to enter the city alone." Beatrice also laughed and immediately stopped talking. She waved her whip and rushed to Skylark City. Colin also urged his horse and followed closely. Chapter 471. There were no skylarks in Skylark City in winter. However, Colin saw a lot of nests in the eaves and corners of the houses along the way. He could imagine that when the flowers bloomed in spring, the sky of the city would be quite lively. "Knight Beatrice, do you know where these skylarks migrate to in winter?" Beatrice froze for a moment, apparently not expecting Colin to ask such a question. At this time, they were walking on the streets of Skylark City, and both sides were crowded with angry people from the eastern region. Nowadays, Colin's reputation in the eastern region was not good, and he was almost synonymous with the devil. If it were not for the guards of the Fiennes family on both sides of the road, it was estimated that many people from the eastern region would have rushed up to tear Colin to pieces. But under such circumstances, Colin was still concerned about the migration of skylarks, which made Beatrice very surprised. Skylarks migrate east in winter. Will they migrate into the Radiant Moon Forest? I don't know about this. Beatrice shook her head and said, "If you are interested in this, you can ask the easternmost Yevel in the eastern region." Colin nodded, thinking that one day he would go to the Arcane City to have a look. The reason why he was concerned about the migration of skylarks was that he thought of a problem. If skylarks could migrate into the Radiant Moon Forest, didn't that mean that the taboo of the Radiant Moon Forest only existed on the ground? Of course, this made no difference to humans. After all, even paladins could only fly for a short time and could not fly for long distances. However, Colin could fly. While he was thinking, Colin had been led into the castle of the Fiennes family by Beatrice and came to the living room. Beatrice waved away the maids who wanted to come forward to serve him, poured a glass of red wine, and then personally delivered it to Colin. The wine swirled in the glass, and it was as red as blood. Colin took it with a smile and drank it in one gulp. If it were Grace, she would probably ask, "Aren't you afraid that the wine is poisoned?" But Beatrice would not test him like this. The straightforward female knight just smiled and looked at him with appreciation. "Your Excellency, is my good-for-nothing son doing well?" "Very well." Colin smiled. "Silvermoon City is a good place. Half-elves are also a hospitable race." "That's good." Beatrice did not seem to be too worried about her son. She asked calmly, "Then, Your Excellency, what are the conditions for redeeming viscounts?" Colin turned the red wine glass in his hand and asked, "What else can your Fiennes family give me now?" "Money, slaves, beauties. Count, as long as you ask, the Fiennes will do their best to satisfy your requests." Beatrice changed the topic. "I feel that these things are not good enough for you." "Really?" Colin put down the wine glass, leaned back on the chair, and asked with interest, "Then what do you think is worthy of me?" Beatrice's amber eyes flashed with a strange light. She came in front of Colin and refilled the wine glass as she said, "Don't worry, Colin. How about a head?" Colin narrowed his eyes and smiled. That depends on whose head it is. Beatrice put the wineglass in front of Colin and smiled. Archbishop Kate, what do you think? Duchess? Colin was shocked. Of course, he knew that the Archbishop Kate, mentioned by Beatrice, was the wife of the Duke of St. Prospero. However, this valiant female knight had just killed the Archbishop of Skylark City, and now she was proposing to kill the Archbishop of the Eastern region. Was she determined to go against the church? Colin suddenly thought of something. He immediately crossed his hands and made a lotus-like gesture. However, Beatrice only frowned after seeing the handprint. She asked in confusion, "Count, is this wine not to your liking?" Colin smiled awkwardly. He reached out and took the wineglass from Beatrice and put it to his mouth. He took the opportunity to drink to cover up his embarrassment. Originally, he thought that Beatrice was another chess piece that Queen Medela had placed in the eastern region, but now it seemed that he had thought too much. "Knight Beatrice, do you have a grudge against the church?" "There is no personal grudge, but there is public indignation." Colin took a sip of wine and signaled Beatrice to continue her explanation with his eyes. Beatrice did not continue, but asked, "Your Excellency, what do you think is the biggest hidden danger of the Empire of Light?" "The orcs?" "No." Beatrice shook her head slowly. "The orcs seem to be aggressive, but they are not terrible. Since the Empire of Light has repelled the orcs twice, they can naturally do it a third time. Furthermore, I believe that external threats are necessary. As someone from the Northern Territory, you should be able to understand this logic after fighting the trolls for so many years." Colin nodded. He had already guessed what Beatrice was about to say, but he did not speak. He just listened quietly. "I think that the degenerate and decadent church is the biggest cancer and hidden danger in the empire." Colin looked at the calm Beatrice and reminded her with a smile, "Knight Beatrice, do you know what will happen to you if this statement is spread? Burned at the stake?" Beatrice shrugged and said nonchalantly. Colin put down his glass, changed his sitting position, and asked, "Then tell me, how did the church become the cancer of the empire?" Beatrice refilled Colin's glass and said slowly, "Because of its existence, the Empire of Light is divided. For example, your invasion of the eastern region this time, if I'm not wrong, should be ordered by the royal family?" Colin took the glass and did not admit or deny it. Beatrice did not care and continued, "The royal family and the church have been fighting openly and covertly since the founding of the empire. Such infighting has seriously damaged the stability and unity of the empire. The church, which was supposed to spread the glory of our Lord and help the people achieve salvation, has lost itself in the struggle for power and profit. All they think about all day is how to divide the forces of the lords to help them fight against the royal family and protect their own interests. The House of St. Prospero in the eastern region is such a tool, or more accurately, a victim. My good daughter-in-law, the Bishop of Skylark City, why did she encourage the Knights of the Fines to assassinate you? Isn't it to make the eastern region and the northern frontier have an irreconcilable feud? And the Duchess, who is the Archbishop of the eastern region, I know all about the little tricks she played in White Dew Castle." Hearing this, Colin could not help but have some doubts on his face. Beatrice saw this and immediately said, "Count, please allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Beatrice St. Prospero." Colin raised his eyebrows. He did not expect this knight to be from the House of St. Prospero, but the doubts on his face did not completely dissipate. In his opinion, a lady like Beatrice who married into the Viscount's family of the House of St. Prospero was probably from a collateral family. Moreover, she had been married for so many years, how could she be so clear about the secrets of White Dew Castle? However, Beatrice continued, "Don't worry. I am the sister of the Duke of St. Prospero." Chapter 472. "You are the sister of the Duke of St. Prospero?" Colin's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Do I not look like it?" Beatrice raised her eyebrows and asked. Colin did not speak. He just felt that as the sister of the Duke of St. Prospero, Beatrice actually married into a Viscount's family. It was a bit too tragic. For comparison, Medela, as the sister of the previous Duke of St. Hilda, married Emperor Reinhardt. Even if Beatrice could not marry into the royal family, she would not be reduced to marrying into this unknown Fiennes family. As if she saw Colin's doubts, Beatrice immediately explained, "It was because I offended that bitch from the church, and my stupid brother was bewitched by her, so I married into this damned place, Skylark City. Actually, I even escaped from the marriage. Hee. Unfortunately, I was caught by my brother." Colin's forehead was full of black lines. The person in front of him was probably a spoiled and willful young lady. Beatrice was still there sighing, "What kind of magic do you think the bitch from the church has? My brother is like this, and so is my useless son. Ever since he married the bishop of Skylark City, he no longer listens to me. Now that he is imprisoned in Silver Moon City, he deserves it. It is a good opportunity for him to reflect on his previous foolish actions." Colin suddenly felt that this Beatrice was targeting the church not because of public anger, but because of personal hatred. Previously, when she said that the church was the cancer of the Radiant Empire, it was probably a high-sounding excuse. The real reason was because of the betrayal of her brother and son. Seeing that Colin did not speak, Beatrice urged, "How about it? I help you kill that bitch Kate, and you let my son go, and you will no longer make things difficult for the Fiennes family?" Colin was a bit speechless and said, "Why do I feel that you obviously want to kill Kate yourself? How did it become helping me?" Beatrice snorted and said, "Count Angeli, don't tell me you don't understand. If Kate dies in my hands, what kind of effect will it have?" This time, Colin did not refute. Indeed, he really wanted to see the Duchess die in Beatrice's hands. After all, the influence of the church represented by the Duchess would obviously have a great negative impact on Colin's plan to control the eastern region. Hence, Colin did not wish to see this woman get in the way of things in White Dew City. However, he did not wish to kill Kate with his own hands, because if he did, he would completely enrage the church. Colin didn't want to do such a stupid thing. The power of the church that Colin understood was already terrifying enough, and this was only the power that was on the surface. Who knew how much power was hidden in the dark? Colin definitely did not want to be on the church's blacklist. But if the Duchess died in the hands of Beatrice, then Colin would not have to bear the wrath of the church. More importantly, Beatrice's surname was Saint Prospero. If the follow-up operation was done properly, it could completely create a gap between the House of Saint Prospero and the church, and even make the eastern region completely side with the royal family. This was simply killing many birds with one stone. But because this matter was so beautiful, Colin could not believe it for a moment. "Knight Beatrice, are you willing to pay such a high price for a Fiennes Viscounts?" Colin couldn't help but ask. It was not that he looked down on the Fiennes Viscounts, but the price that Beatrice paid in order to redeem her son was a bit too high. She gambled the future of herself, the Fiennes, the House of Saint Prospero, and even the entire eastern region. Or could it be that this vengeful woman had reached such a desperate point in order to take revenge on her sister-in-law who bullied her in the past? Colin had seen many stupid people, but he knew that the one in front of him was obviously not one. The previous series of actions were not something that a stupid person could do. "Of course, I'm not just doing it for that good-for-nothing son," Beatrice said frankly. "He's not that important. The reason why I'm doing this is actually to help the Empire of Light eliminate the internal dangers." Colin raised his eyebrows and said in surprise, "You want to use this to force the House of Saint Prospero to fight against the church? To be more precise, it should be to suppress the church." Beatrice looked seriously into Colin's eyes, her amber eyes flashing with a deep and firm light. "Now that this church has seriously affected the stability and unity of the empire, we must cut off its tentacles everywhere and let the gods belong to the gods, and the secular belong to the secular. Only in this way can the Empire of Light firmly guard the most fertile land on this continent, and humans will not follow in the footsteps of the elves and dragons." Colin's expression gradually became serious. Originally, Colin thought that Beatrice and Queen Medela were allies. After all, they were both trying to fight against the church. Now it seemed that the two of them were not on the same side at all. To be honest, although Beatrice's power was completely incomparable to Queen Medela's, if he had to choose an ally to fight against the church, Colin would not hesitate to choose Beatrice. Queen Medela would only continue to encourage Colin to be the vanguard against the church, while she hid behind and tried to take advantage of the situation. As for Beatrice, the female knight first cut off the head of a bishop with her own hands, and now she was eyeing the archbishop of the eastern region. Colin believed that Beatrice should be selfless. She really wanted to suppress the church's intervention in the secular world, so that the Empire of Light could be united and not collapse in internal friction. Even if he knew that Beatrice's actions were very beneficial to him, Colin could not help but remind her, "Knight Beatrice, you should understand that if it was just a bishop of Skylark City, there would still be room for negotiation, but if you really kill the archbishop of the eastern region, then even the house of Saint Prospero can't protect you." Beatrice smiled and said, "When did I need the protection of the house of Saint Prospero? As for the church's anger, I have already prepared for it, so you don't have to worry." Colin's expression was complicated. He opened his mouth, but only sighed and said, "You are a real knight." Beatrice's eyes were calm and firm as she accepted Colin's praise. Then she looked serious and said, "Well, if you agree to this proposal, then I need your help." "How can I help?" "Because I tried to assassinate Kate once before, so she is already on guard against me. I need you to help me control the guardian knights around her." Colin was speechless again. This was not the first time this woman tried to assassinate the Archbishop of the Eastern region. It seemed that the Duke of St. Prospero was lenient enough to only marry her to Skylark City. Beatrice, of course, did not know what Colin was thinking and continued. "My plan is like this. I will go to White Dew City alone, and you will lead the army there later. Don't worry, you don't have to attack White Dew City, I will help you open the gate. After entering the city, you will lead the blood cavalry and follow me. As long as you can help me eliminate the guards around Kate, I can kill her with my own hands." Due to the lag in the transmission of information, Beatrice did not know that White Dew City had actually been breached by the blood cavalry once, and her brother, the Duke of St. Prospero, was killed. Colin hesitated for a moment and did not tell her this. He wanted to know if Beatrice would stick to her heart and continue to fulfill her promise after entering the city and learning the news. Good. It's settled. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. Chapter 473. After leaving Skylark City, Colin finally met up with the main force of the blood cavalry after traveling for another 2 days. Since he had already personally participated in the operation in White Dew City through the blood slaves, Colin had a general understanding of the situation, but he still patiently listened to Knight Roger's report. But at the end of the report, Knight Roger gave Colin a small surprise. "The messenger of the royal family?" "Yes, Colin. We met him after we evacuated from White Dew City. He claimed that he was going to deliver the war order signed by His Majesty to the House of St. Prospero, so I brought him along. Do you want to see him?" Colin was a bit speechless. He said angrily, "You are getting bolder and bolder. You even dare to kidnap the messenger of the royal family." Knight Roger shrunk his head and didn't dare to say anything. "Forget it, bring him to see me." "Yes." Knight Roger hurriedly turned around and left. Not long after, he came back with a young and handsome knight. This person was wearing a gorgeous armor with the badge of Scarlet Flame of Purification. Obviously, this person was not only the messenger of the royal family, but also a member of the San Lorenzo family. "Count Angeli, you dare to allow your subordinates to kidnap the messenger of the royal family, aren't you afraid of His Majesty's punishment?" The young knight shouted at Colin with his head held high, his face full of arrogance as if he had not experienced the harsh beating of society. Colin smiled and said, "You said that you are the messenger of the royal family. Do you have any evidence?" The young knight snorted and took out a scroll from his pocket. He opened it in front of Colin and said, "This is the war order signed by His Majesty Reinhardt himself. There is also the symbol of the royal family on it. Count Angeli, don't tell me you don't recognize it?" Colin took a closer look, then he immediately showed a look of realization. "Ah, I see. Mr. Messenger, I'm really sorry. My stupid knights don't know anything, so they didn't recognize your identity. Roger, quickly come and apologize to Mr. Messenger." Knight Roger lowered his head and bowed. I'm sorry, Mr. Messenger. The messenger rolled his eyes and said in a disdainful tone, Count Angeli, are you trying to fool us with a simple apology? Cousin Andy, I didn't expect to see you here. Prince Harrison ran out at the right time. Your Royal Highness, Your Royal Highness. Andy hurriedly saluted. Seeing that Princess Judy was also there, he had no choice but to salute again. Only then did he realize that the young count in front of him was the teacher of the prince and princess. He immediately put away his arrogance and didn't dare to pursue the matter any further. Count Angeli, His Majesty has entrusted me with the task. I must hand this war order to Duke St. Pras as soon as possible. I can let bygones be bygones, but now, I must rush to White Dew City immediately. Please don't stop me. Of course I won't stop the emissary of the royal family. Colin chuckled. However, if you want to hand over the war order to the Duke of St. Prospero, there's no need to go to White Dew City. Knight Andy immediately frowned. What do you mean? What I mean is that the Duke of St. Prospero is here. Knight Andy was stunned. Count Angeli, are you kidding me? Knight Roger, who had his head lowered, smiled and said, Mr. Messenger, the Duke of St. Prospero was indeed invited by us. Knight Andy looked at the two in shock. After a while, he said, All right, please take me to meet the Duke of St. Prospero. This way, please. Knight Roger led the group to a huge tent. He opened the curtain and made an inviting gesture. Knight Andy took the lead and walked in. He then found that the tent was empty. There was only a black coffin in the middle of the tent. Count Angeli, are you kidding me? Knight Andy turned around and stared at Colin angrily. Colin ignored Knight Andy. He walked to the coffin and opened the lid. Bang! The coffin lid hit the ground and dust flew everywhere. Colin turned around and said to Knight Andy with an expressionless face, Knight Andy, come and greet the Duke of St. Prospero. You! The Knight of Andy suddenly had an ominous premonition. A terrible thought appeared in his mind, but he immediately rejected it. Impossible! Knight Andy slowly walked to the coffin and looked inside. After that, he felt like he was struck by lightning. His whole body froze on the spot. This is impossible! This is impossible! Knight Andy felt a chill down his spine. He couldn't help but tremble. Colin patted Andy's shoulder and said, Knight Andy, now you understand. The Blood Cavalry brought you here out of kindness. They didn't want you to go to White Dew City for nothing. Knight Andy only felt like he was being stared at by a horrible monster. Although Count Angeli was gentle and didn't do anything hostile, he still felt that his life was seriously threatened. Knight Andy swallowed hard. He no longer had the arrogance he had before. He tried to put on a brave front and said, Count Angeli, how dare you kill the Duke of St. Prospero? Colin shrugged and said, The Duke of St. Prospero was killed by the Blood Cavalry on the battlefield. What's wrong with that? The Empire of Light had restrictions on the fighting among the nobles. Despicable acts such as assassination, poisoning, backstabbing, and so on were obviously not tolerated. However, under these two circumstances, it was fine for the nobles to kill each other. One was a duel. The other was to kill them openly on the battlefield. So, the Blood Cavalry broke into White Dew City? Yes, just 3 days ago. At that time, the Duke of St. Prospero fought bravely to the last moment. I also admired him very much. Colin pretended to exclaim. Knight Andy trembled and asked, But, the orcs' invasion was imminent. How could you? Colin spread out his hands and said without fear, but at that time, His Majesty's war order hadn't been sent to White Dew City yet. Knight Andy was speechless. In fact, the news that His Majesty was about to start a war had already spread. However, the war order signed by His Majesty with legal effect needed to be delivered by people. It was definitely much slower than carrier pigeons. This time difference became Colin's excuse. The key was that no one could punish Colin for this, because he really didn't see the war order. Knight Andy's expression changed, and finally he had to say, Since the Duke of St. Prospero is dead, then I will go to White Dew Castle and send the war order to the next Duke of the Eastern region. That's just right. We can go together, Colin said with a smile. Knight Andy suddenly became alert. Why are you going to White Dew City? Of course, to congratulate the new Duke of the Eastern region. Colin's face was natural. Knight Andy didn't say anything. He didn't seem to want to stay in this gloomy place any longer. He then half-heartedly cupped his hands and turned to leave in a hurry. The curtain hung down, blocking the sunlight outside. Only the flickering candlelight was left in the tent, reflecting on Colin's expressionless face. He stood alone beside the coffin and quietly looked at the body of the Duke of St. Prospero for a long time. Finally, he revealed an excited smile. Then, he opened his mouth and revealed his ferocious fangs. He bit down. Gulp, gulp. Chapter 474. The night gradually darkened. In the dark tent, a few rows of candles were trying their best to burn themselves, barely managing to push open the darkness. Under the illumination of the candlelight, a bloody mist surrounded the coffin in the center of the tent, rising into the air. Within the bloody mist, Colin's figure flickered in and out of existence, seeming both real and illusory. As time passed, a faint blood-red pattern gradually appeared on Colin's body. It looked like an arcane spell formation, but also like the trajectory of the stars. Traces of terrifying aura were emitted uncontrollably, suppressing the flickering candles in the tent until they dimmed. The thick darkness took this opportunity to expand without restraint, causing the atmosphere in the tent to become even more sinister. Suddenly, two spots of light appeared, tearing apart the darkness. It was Colin who had opened his eyes. His pupils had turned into bright red vertical slits, emitting a cold light. The light disappeared in a flash, and Colin also raised his head from the Duke of St. Prospero, who had turned into a dried corpse. He could clearly feel that every cell in his body seemed to be cheering in joy. The bloody mist around him seemed to be able to absorb some mysterious energy particles from the air, transforming them into nourishing energy that he absorbed into his body. The cells in his body that were nourished by this mysterious energy began to evolve at an accelerated rate. His muscle fibers became stronger and more resilient, and his bones and joints became more crystalline. The blood in his body also surged restlessly in his veins like a raging tide. Thump, thump, thump. Colin's heart began to beat rapidly like a powerful pump, causing the blood in his body to surge even more violently, even to the point of boiling. The rising blood pressure caused all the blood vessels in Colin's body to protrude, wrapping around his body like purple steel ropes. His muscles also began to swell due to the congestion of blood, quickly filling up the original armor. A pair of black bat wings pierced through the armor, slowly extending from Colin's back. Boom! The armor could no longer withstand this force, and it was completely blown apart by Colin's expanding body. Fortunately, this tent was big enough. Otherwise, it might not be able to accommodate Colin in his true vampire body state. It was not the first time that Colin had promoted to a higher level by sucking the blood of a high-level knight. Therefore, Colin was not too amazed by the changes in his body. Instead, he was carefully sensing the source of this marvelous strength. His blood was boiling, his body was moving restlessly, and his consciousness, under the pain brought about by this drastic change, actually started to become blurry. However, Colin gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay conscious. In a trance, countless images, information, and memories flashed before his eyes. He tried his best to see those images clearly, but it was as if they were separated by a layer of hazy gauze. A faint murmur sounded in his ears, as if someone was whispering. The blood mist rose into the air, condensing into mysterious and complicated blood patterns on the surface of Colin's enormous body. Bang, bang, bang. With his heart beating violently, Colin's consciousness became more and more blurry, and his eyes became more and more empty. In an instant, an unstoppable darkness swept over, completely drowning Colin's consciousness. Crack! A bolt of lightning tore through the darkness. Colin opened his eyes again and found that he was standing on the peak of a mountain, but the ground under his feet was silver. Crack! Another bolt of lightning flashed. Colin found a dark figure at the edge of the cliff. The figure held a torch high in his hand, and the dancing flame became the only light in this darkness. That person threw the torch down the cliff. The red flame drew a line of fire in the air, tumbling down into the bottomless abyss. The third bolt of lightning flashed. The lightning illuminated the entire mountain peak. At this time, Colin found that the mountain peak was full of people, and he seemed to be one of them. These figures all raised their hands up high and mumbled something. "Wake up, mighty king." The sound of prayers rang in Colin's ears, but strangely, he could not hear the specific content of the prayers. The fourth bolt of lightning flashed. The lightning illuminated everything between heaven and earth. In the pitch-black abyss, a dark red flame slowly rose up. No, that was not a flame. Colin abruptly came back to his senses, only to discover that it was a gigantic, dark red, ferocious vertical pupil. The place he was standing on was not a mountain peak, but the head of a giant beast. In the darkness, lightning flashed in the sky, and Colin finally saw the scene in front of him. It was an incomparably huge silver python. The python's huge body was like a mountain range, stretching to the end of his vision. Under the lightning, there were bloody wounds that were deep to the bone on the python's body. The giant python's murky eyes quietly stared at Colin, and in the dark red vertical pupil, Colin's face was reflected. It seemed to want to say something, but Colin could not receive any information. He could only see the python's helplessness, old age, and sadness from its single eye. It was like an old king who had reached the end of his road and was looking forward to a successor who could replace him, a new king. Boom! The last bolt of lightning flashed by. Everything returned to the boundless darkness. The silver python's vertical pupil also disappeared. But Colin could still vaguely hear whispers echoing in his ears. Maybe the python was trying to say something to him. Unfortunately, he could not hear it clearly. Outside the tent, Knight Roger heard the noise and quickly walked over, but he was blocked by a blood thrall. What happened to the Count? The blood thrall did not answer, and only quietly stood in front of Knight Roger. "Even I can't go in?" Knight Roger asked angrily. But the blood thrall in front of him was still unmoved. Knight Roger knew that these people were Count Angeli's personal guards. They had a mysterious background, but they were all very strong, and they fought bravely without fear of death. If he did not know that these personal guards would not betray Count Angeli, Knight Roger might have already forced his way in. At this moment, the indistinct murmurs in the tent stopped abruptly, but then an extremely terrifying pressure suddenly erupted, like a surging wave that swept through the entire camp. Knight Roger, who was the closest to the tent, felt this pressure the most. If he did not feel the strong holy light energy and the familiar aura of Count Angeli, he might have already drawn his sword. "Count!" While Knight Roger was anxiously waiting, one of the personal guards outside the tent seemed to have been summoned, and he turned around and walked in. Not long after, he saw Colin walk out in large strides. "Count, are you all right?" Knight Roger hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. At the same time, he also noticed that the armor Count Angeli was wearing seemed to be that of the personal guard who just walked into the tent. But he did not dare to ask too much, and only hid this doubt in the bottom of his heart. "Is there anything to eat?" Colin opened his mouth and asked. His eyes flashed red from time to time, and his body was still emitting holy light energy. It seemed that he was unable to perfectly control the sudden increase in power. "Of course there is." "Please wait a moment." Knight Roger raised his head and felt the surging power on Colin's body. He could not help but ask, "Count, have you advanced to rank 6? Colin nodded and looked in the direction of White Dew City. Chapter 475. White Dew Castle. It was late at night. It was early winter, and the weather was cold. There was a faint scent of night orchid in the air, silently soothing the anxious hearts of the people in the castle. "Duchess! Has Vincent not woken up yet?" "Not yet." The Marquise's face was full of sorrow. She bit her lips and wanted to say something, but seeing the Duchess's serious expression, she did not dare to say anything. "I'm going to perform a healing spell on the Marquis. You can leave first." The Duchess waved her hand. "Yes." The Marquise and the maids quietly left, leaving only the Duchess and Marquis Vincent in the room. The Duchess sat down on the armchair next to the bed, quietly looking at her sleeping son. Marquis Vincent lay on his back on the sickbed, his body covered with a pure white blanket. His face was as white as a sheet, and his breathing was weak, as if he would stop breathing in the next second. However, he did not take his last breath. "My child, why do you have to hold on so bitterly?" The Duchess reached out and gently stroked Marquis Vincent's face, her eyes full of distress and confusion, but they were quickly replaced by determination and indifference. "Don't worry, Mother will soon free you. Don't blame Mother for being cruel, this is a necessary sacrifice. Only then can we win back the attention of our Lord." After saying that, the Duchess put her hands together and silently prayed. She then reached out her right hand and lightly touched Marquis Vincent's forehead, nose, and lips with her index finger. A faint holy light spread from her fingertips, making Marquis Vincent's pale face instantly become incomparably holy. If someone who understood the Church's divine arts were here, they would realize that what the Duchess was performing was not a healing spell, but a prayer spell that allowed the dead to rest in peace. The holy light gradually dimmed, and the Duchess took out an exquisite small bottle from her bosom. The bottle was a bottle of holy water, but only the Duchess knew what was inside. But just as the Duchess was about to feed the water into Marquis Vincent's mouth, there was a sudden knock on the door. The Duchess frowned and continued to feed the water into Marquis Vincent's mouth, then got up and opened the door. "Didn't I say not to disturb me at this time?" The butler apologized profusely, but still reported, "Madam, Miss Beatrice has just entered the city." "Beatrice?" The Duchess' expression changed, as if she had recalled a bad memory. She then walked out with a gloomy face. Walking down the spiral staircase to the hall on the first floor, the Duchess happened to bump into Beatrice, who was coming in. "Beatrice." As soon as the two women met, sparks seemed to fly in the air. The knight who was originally behind the Duchess took a step forward. At the same time, he put his right hand on the sword at his waist and looked at Beatrice vigilantly. It couldn't be helped. This young miss had a criminal record. Beatrice rolled her eyes and said disdainfully, "I haven't seen you for so many years, but you're still so timid." "I haven't seen you for so many years, and you're still as rude as ever," the Duchess retorted. Beatrice pursed her lips and did not want to be entangled with the Duchess. She asked the butler, "Where is my brother?" The butler sighed and said with a sorrowful expression, "The Duke. I'm afraid he's already met with misfortune." "What?" Beatrice's eyes widened. She immediately grabbed the butler's collar and asked, "What the hell is going on?" The butler had to tell the story of how the blood cavalry broke through the White Dew City with trepidation. After listening to it, Beatrice seemed to have lost her soul. She stood there in a daze. The Duchess said coldly, "Beatrice, now you know the seriousness of the situation, right? Stay here and don't make any more trouble for me." After that, the Duchess strode out. Beatrice did not refute. She just let go of the butler's collar and stood there with her expression constantly changing. The butler waited for a long time. Seeing that Beatrice had not moved, he suggested in a low voice, "Miss Beatrice, I have ordered someone to tidy up your room. You have been tired from the journey. Why don't you wash up and rest first?" Beatrice did not respond to the words. Just when the butler did not know what to do, she finally spoke. "You said that my brother had issued a conscription order to the lords south of the Alsace Mountains. Why didn't the Fines family receive it?" "It can't be. I personally helped the Duke organize the conscription order. One of them was sent to Skylark City." Beatrice narrowed her eyes and immediately realized that the conscription order should have been hidden by her good daughter-in-law. The purpose of her doing so was not difficult to guess. She must have wanted to ambush Colin and his party from Tinder City first, and then lead the private army of the Fines family to defeat the blood cavalry passing through Skylark City. Unfortunately, before she could lead the army out of the city, she was killed by Beatrice, who had learned the news. This stupid woman. She deserved to die. Beatrice's heart was boiling with anger. Although she had a lot of dissatisfaction with her brother, the Duke of St. Prospero, his death still gave Beatrice a great blow. Thinking of her agreement with Colin Angelo in Skylark City, Beatrice was shaken for a moment. Did she really want to cooperate with the enemy who killed her brother? What made her feel even more confused was the future of the eastern region. No matter how mediocre the Duke of St. Prospero was, at least he could control the situation. With him, the situation in the eastern region would not be too bad. But now, with the death of the Duke of St. Prospero, the problem of the heir immediately became obvious. The eldest son, Vincent, still occupied the position of Marquis of the Eastern region. It stood to reason that he should inherit the position of Duke. However, not long ago, the Duke of St. Prospero, under the urging of some people, wantonly weakened the support of Marquis Vincent and began to support the second son, the Earl of Avon. As a result, the Earl of Avon, who originally had no hope of inheriting the position of Duke, now had the confidence to compete with Marquis Vincent. More importantly, the battle for the heir was similar to a duel. Once involved, it was impossible to withdraw before the life and death was determined. Originally, Marquis Vincent might have been able to tolerate his younger brother who wasn't a threat to him, but after Evan revealed his intention to fight for the title of Duke, Marquis Vincent obviously wouldn't be so magnanimous anymore. Similarly, Count Evan wouldn't wait for his elder brother to inherit the title of Duke and then face the inevitable suppression and ostracization. Coupled with the covetous northern frontier and the sinister church, Beatrice's mind was in a mess for a moment. "Miss Beatrice." The butler saw that Beatrice was silent for a long time and could not help but remind her. Beatrice came back to her senses and said, "You just said that Vincent was seriously injured in that battle? Take me to see him." Chapter 476. Has he never woken up? Faced with Beatrice's question, the Marquise shook her head mechanically. Her husband seemed like he would wake up in the next moment, but it also seemed like he would never open his eyes. After so many days, from the initial hope to the gradual disappointment, the young Marquise had been tormented to the point of numbness. Beatrice looked at the haggard Marquise and sighed, "Go and rest. I'll take care of Vincent tonight." The Marquise shook her head. She knew that not only her, but the entire Hall family's greatest hope now rested on her husband. Under such pressure, she did not dare to relax at all. Even if she knew that it would be futile even if she stayed by the bedside, she still stayed, as if this was the only way to ease the anxiety in her heart. "Think about Eckhart. He needs you too." Hearing her son's name, the Marquise's eyes finally lit up. After struggling for a moment, she got up and said, "Madame Beatrice, I'll have to trouble you to take care of Vincent tonight." With that, the Marquise left the room. Beatrice said to the maids, "All of you can leave first. I'll call for you if there's anything." "Yes," the maidservants replied, and then they quietly retreated. When the door was closed again, Beatrice said softly, "All right. There's no one else here." Then, Marquis Vincent opened his eyes. Seeing this, Beatrice was not surprised at all. She had insisted on persuading the Marquise to leave just now because Marquis Vincent had touched her body very secretly. The Marquise, who was in a trance and extremely haggard, obviously did not notice all this. "Aunt, you're finally here." Marquis Vincent grabbed Beatrice's hand and finally showed a sincere smile on his face. "What's going on? Why did you have to pretend to be unconscious?" Marquis Vincent took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Because Mother wants to kill me." "Kate wants to kill you?" Beatrice looked at Marquis Vincent in surprise and frowned. "Although I've always thought that crazy woman is willing to kill anyone for the church. She shouldn't go so far as to kill her own son, right? What's more, what's in it for her? My guess is that she wants to push me to the position of Duke of the Eastern region and then kill me. This way, Eckhart will become the first heir to the position of Duke of the Eastern region." Beatrice suddenly understood and said, "So that's how it is. Once a 3-year-old Duke of the Eastern region succeeds to the throne, the Eastern region will be under the control of that bitch Kate." "That's right." Marquis Vincent's eyes flickered with pain and hatred. "That's why she didn't treat me seriously before. She clearly hoped that I would die from my injuries as soon as possible. Even when she saw me hanging on to my last breath, she still... What else is she doing?" "Nothing." Marquis Vincent immediately changed the subject. "Over the years, my mother has roped in countless nobles of the Eastern region. Even the house of Saint Prospero has been infiltrated by the church, so I didn't dare to trust anyone. I could only pretend to be in a coma until you appeared. Aunt, you're the only person I can trust now." Beatrice laughed at herself and said, "Because I'm the last person in the eastern region who can be bought by Carter, right? But it's also because you're my most respected knight of the eastern region, the most upright Saint Prospero." Marquis Vincent quickly flattered. Beatrice smiled noncommittally and asked, "How are you going to deal with this situation now? Do you still have anyone you can trust? Are there any loyal knights? Are there any troops you can command?" Marquis Vincent smiled bitterly and said, "Aunt, I only have you now." Beatrice rolled her eyes and scolded him. "So you've been pretending to be dead for so many days, but you haven't thought of a way to break the situation?" "Well, in fact, I did think of a way." Marquis Vincent's eyes flickered. "What way?" "I guess that the forces in White Dew City have been roped in by my mother. So, if I want to break the situation, I can only rely on external forces." "External forces?" Beatrice thought for a moment and wondered, "What forces do you have outside White Dew City? Are you referring to Earl Hall?" "Earl Hall is indeed an important force that I can rely on. However, he is still far away on the New Shui River, and his subordinates are the Navy. He can't do anything about the situation in White Dew City." "Then which force are you talking about?" Marquis Vincent hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice and said, "The Blood Cavalry." Beatrice raised her beautiful eyebrows and looked at Marquis Vincent with a complicated look. Marquis Vincent quickly explained, "Aunt, listen to me. Of course, I know the hatred between the Blood Cavalry and the House of Saint Prospero. I also know that Earl Colin Angeli is treacherous and cunning. He has always been coveting the eastern region. However, in the current situation, I can only use them to deal with the internal threats. Otherwise, the situation in the eastern region will only be worse." Beatrice smiled faintly and said, "Do you know? In fact, before I came to White Dew City, I met Colin Angeli once in Skylark City. And I reached an agreement with him." Marquis Vincent suddenly widened his eyes and said, "What agreement?" "I helped him kill Kate, and he let go of the Viscount's fine." Marquis Vincent's eyes lit up, and he immediately asked, "How are you going to kill Mother?" Beatrice did not hide and said frankly, "I will secretly open the city gate and let the Blood Cavalry into White Dew City. Since they could kill your father last time, they must be able to kill the guards around your mother this time. In this way, I can kill her with my own hands." After hearing this, Marquis Vincent was silent for a long time before he said, "Aunt, in fact, my original plan is similar, but I plan to let my mother die in the hands of the Blood Cavalry." Beatrice shook her head slowly. "Kate must die in my hands." Marquis Vincent frowned and was very puzzled. "Aunt, why do you have to kill my mother with your own hands? Is it because of those grudges in the past?" Beatrice glanced at Marquis Vincent and snorted, "What? Am I such a vengeful person in your mind?" Marquis Vincent quickly shook his head, but before he could think of how to answer this question, he heard Beatrice say again, "Well, to tell you the truth, I want to kill Kate with my own hands. There is only one reason: to completely break the relationship between the House of Saint Prospero and the Church." This powerful sentence made Marquis Vincent's heart tremble. After thinking for a moment, he finally understood his aunt's painstaking efforts. Indeed, if the Archbishop of the Eastern region died in the hands of Beatrice, there would be an irreparable gap between the House of Saint Prospero and the Church, and the royal family was very likely to accept the House of Saint Prospero's allegiance as a result. The situation of the empire might be completely changed. However, Marquis Vincent was also very clear that Beatrice, who caused this series of upheavals, might suffer endless revenge from the Church. Just as he was about to remind his aunt of the possible consequences of killing an archbishop, he heard her speak again. "In addition, I want to kill another person." "Who?" "Colin Angelo." Chapter 477. Thump, thump. Marquis Vincent's heartbeat suddenly accelerated. For a moment, even he himself did not know what he was thinking when he heard that his aunt was going to kill Colin Angeli. Beatrice did not notice Marquis Vincent's strange behavior and continued to explain to him, Marquis Vincent, Colin Angeli is too dangerous and terrible. Even if the Eastern region successfully gets rid of the control of the church, it can only curl up under his shadow. So, this man must die. And once he dies, the blood cavalry will be finished. As long as you can become the Duke of the Eastern region, it will not be difficult to persuade Earl Hall to change his mind. As long as the northern frontier cannot cross the furious river, there is nothing to worry about. What's more, once Colin Angeli dies, the northern frontier will inevitably fall into turmoil. Even if it does not fall into turmoil, it will absolutely be impossible to touch the eastern region. Marquis Garcia is old, and the Battle of Shadow Canyon has destroyed his spirit. Now he does not have the ability to rebuild the Black Cavalry. In this way, you can leisurely reorganize the eastern region and completely eliminate the remnants of the church. You don't have to worry about the church's interference because the royal family will not stand idly by. An archbishop of the eastern region is enough to make the royal family believe in the determination of the House of St. Prospero. Seeing the struggle on Marquis Vincent's face, Beatrice mistakenly thought that he was still worried about the church's revenge, so she smiled and teased him. Even if the church wants revenge, it will come to me first. I'm not afraid. What are you afraid of? Marquis Vincent did not dare to confess his inner struggle to Beatrice, so he had to put on a worried look and said, "Aunt, are you really not worried about the church's revenge?" Beatrice smiled and said, "What's there to be afraid of? At worst, I will hide my identity and wander the world. Anyway, I have wanted to do this for a long time. Your father used to stop me, but now that he is dead, I am free. I don't believe that the church can really chase me to the end of the world." Marquis Vincent was silent. Beatrice thought that he was still worried about her, so she smiled and patted Marquis Vincent's hand and said, "Well, don't put on such a weak appearance. I don't want to see the future Duke of the Eastern region like this. Furthermore, as a knight of the House of St. Prospero, how could I be afraid of sacrificing myself? I only hope that my sacrifice is meaningful, so what you should do is to properly govern the Eastern region and let it regain its glory. In addition, out of selfishness, I also hope that you can take care of the Fiennes family more and not vent your anger on them because of Evan. I really hope that you can show enough mercy. You can strip him of his title, take back his territory, and eliminate his supporters, but at least leave him alive. Because one day, you will find that only the members of the House of St. Prospero can stand up and protect the Eastern region in times of crisis. Just like your father, he doted on kites so much back then, but when it really came down to it, didn't he still have to rely on me, his younger sister, to stand up and clean up the situation? No matter how good the others are, they may not be reliable. And no matter how bad Evan is, at least his surname is St. Prospero." Listening to his aunt's long-winded last words, an indescribable feeling suddenly emerged in Marquis Vincent's heart. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to 20 years ago when he was officially conferred the title of Marquis of the Eastern region by his father. That was the first time he felt a heavy responsibility and an unparalleled sense of sacred mission. Vincent St. Prospero, today, in the name of the Lord of the Eastern region, I confer you the title of Marquis of the Eastern region. From now on, you will shoulder the responsibility of protecting the people and vassals of the Eastern region, and take this as an honor until the end of your life. His father's words were firmly engraved in Marquis Vincent's heart, but as time passed, these words seemed to be inevitably eroded and obliterated, especially after the fiasco in Silvermoon City. Marquis Vincent felt that his status had plummeted, while his younger brother Evan gradually gained more attention from his father. And when he encountered another failure in Silvermoon City and became a captive, what his father and brother did was the betrayal of the lowly. It was precisely because of this betrayal that Marquis Vincent had no qualms about stabbing that dagger into his father's chest. But now, looking at his aunt, Beatrice, who was sitting beside him with a determined and calm expression, Marquis Vincent suddenly felt a strong sense of guilt. The pride of St. Prospero, the glory of St. Prospero, and the perseverance of St. Prospero, Vincent felt that what he had done was simply blasphemy against the name of St. Prospero. "I, Vincent St. Prospero, swear in this holy land, under the gaze of the Lord, that from now on, no matter what difficulties I encounter, I will shoulder the responsibility of protecting the eastern region, the responsibility of protecting the glory of the house of Saint Prospero, until the end of my life. The old oath echoed in his ears, and the expression in Marquis Vincent's eyes gradually became firm. "And how do you plan to kill Colin Angeli?" Beatrice, of course, knew nothing about the psychological changes in Marquis Vincent. "As long as I kill him, I will naturally be able to gain Colin Angeli's trust. When the time comes, I will assassinate him when he is unprepared. I have a great chance of succeeding." Seeing Marquis Vincent frown, Beatrice mistakenly thought that he was worried about the consequences of assassinating an earl, so she spoke again. "You don't have to worry about the consequences of doing so. Anyway, I already have the bad reputation of killing an archbishop of the eastern region, so naturally, I am not afraid of bearing the bad reputation of assassinating an earl of the empire. When the time comes, you can just announce that you have removed my name from the house of Saint Prospero, and it would be best if you could expel me from the eastern region, so that I can start my life as a fugitive." Looking at his aunt who was pretending to be relaxed, Marquis Vincent only felt that his throat was blocked, but he still took a deep breath, got rid of these useless pretentious feelings, and said in a deep voice, "Aunt, when you assassinate Colin Angeli, please remember to cut off his head." Beatrice smiled faintly and said, "No problem. In fact, I also like to cut off the enemy's head very much. It is like receiving a commemorative medal." "Aunt." Marquis Vincent tightly grasped Beatrice's hand and repeated with a dignified expression, "Please remember, you must cut off Colin Angeli's head." Beatrice realized that something was wrong. She frowned and asked, "Why do you care so much about Colin Angeli's head?" Marquis Vincent's expression changed, but in the end, he did not say the deepest secret in his heart. He just emphasized, "Aunt, if you trust me, then do as I say." Beatrice stared at Marquis Vincent's eyes for a long time before nodding. "Okay. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.